And here we go. What's happening, everybody? Hope everybody's had an amazing couple weeks. Obviously wasn't able to get to one of these last week, but here we are. And you know what? It's good. I had a little bit of an insightful last couple weeks. Had a couple really amazing conversations with some colleagues, with some people that I just met, and you know, a lot of this topic of just equipment and gear and how prevalent it is, like kept on coming up. And it's interesting because I used to be the biggest gearhead out of everybody. I used to spend so much time A/Bing stuff that like I was in the weeds. I was so in the weeds. And it's fun. It is fun. And that's cool. All down for that. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying like we can't, you know, get in the weeds with gear stuff. It's awesome, right? Oh, my camera's not focusing. Anyways, here we go. But the topic of like, you know, gear sluts or gear space or whatever it's called, and a lot of these like YouTube guys who are doing gear reviews, like I don't want to be judgmental, but I so don't want to be that guy that I've on purpose I've shied away from even considering doing this, what we're about to do for the next few hours here, and talk about plugins, talk about equipment, talk about gear. I've been like, hey, what's up, Jason? Jason, you're my gear nut buddy, man. We like talk about getting in the weeds. And I love getting in the weeds off camera. And so I started questioning, I'm like, why am I having this aversion to like talking about plugins and talking about gear and talking about this stuff? And it's just because there's such a massive saturation of it already online. And I think a lot of it online is very disingenuous. And so this kind of brought me to something I teased on Instagram about an hour ago. I was introduced to a YouTube channel out there right now, and it's not big yet, but it might get big soon. And it's almost like a really oddly produced investigative journalism on YouTube pro audio influencers. And if you've seen this guy's videos, you'll know what I mean. It's brutal. It's ruthless. This guy, no holds barred. It's pretty crazy. But I went down the rabbit hole of all his videos yesterday, and I started to think, I'm like, yeah, you know what? This is a problem. Like the whole influencer problem is very relevant today. And it's something that I think we don't realize where people's motives are, or where, why somebody's doing something, or whether or not there's a bias there. And unfortunately, that's just kind of like society now, right? With media, with, you know, YouTube paid reviews and affiliate links and all this shit. But I just wanted to preface this whole video, this whole live stream, with some insight as to why I kind of shy away from this. And I shouldn't shy away from this. I just have to do it my own way. And I want to make sure that you guys know from the get-go what this is and what this isn't. So I'll tell you right now what this isn't, because if you're not into it, then you just pull the plug. This is not going to be me telling you how this plugin is way better than everything else and nothing else can do what this plugin does. This is not going to be me preaching about how one company is so much better than the other because they don't use iLok or whatever bullshit. You've got to come up with your own reasons as to why you use a certain thing. I've come up with mine. I use certain plugins for certain reasons, and some of those reasons are good reasons, and some of them in your eyes might not be good reasons. That's fine. All this is a conversation. Yes, obviously it's a one-way conversation, but I definitely want you guys to interact with this, ask questions. Looks like we've got a really good connection tonight. I actually swapped over to my new computer, my new M1 Mac Studio, and finally up and running, and it seems to be working well. So what this is not a gear review. This is not a plugin review. This is not, if you hear the word game changer out of my mouth tonight, I give you all carte blanche to basically just roast me online for the next year. There's no such thing as game changer, and if there is, you're playing the wrong game. So yeah, let's dig into this. You know, what this is going to be tonight is basically me I want to go through and highlight things that I use every day. Some of these things I've been using for years. And the reason I still use them isn't because there isn't something better out there. It's because I'm so used to it. There's a look, there's a feel, there's a sound, there's something. There's a reason why. But I want to give you some insight as to what my thought process is, what the things that I'm looking for in new plugins, or when something new comes out, not how I evaluate it, but if it's something where I'm like, yeah, I'll consider looking at that. That all being said, and I said this on my Instagram channel about an hour ago on the live, just about every one of these plugin companies has a really, really decent trial period for pretty much most of their plugins. It's amazing. Some of these you can use for 2 weeks. Like no clicks, no mutes, none of that crap. Some of these you can use in a session, print it, and you've basically, you know, had access to that plugin for maybe an entire mix, maybe an entire production, whatever it is. So there's no reason why there's no reason why all of us cannot make our own decisions. We don't need to watch a YouTube video of a guy telling you what he thinks. And you know, I'm not saying credibility, you know, is the end all be all, or credentials maybe, but it ultimately doesn't matter if I think something sounds good. Yeah, I might have made records that you guys like the sound of, so maybe there is a little bit of credibility. Maybe there is a little bit of like, yeah, well, you know what, I like the way his records sound, and he uses these tools. So if I like records that sound that way, then yeah, maybe that falls in line. But when there's guys on YouTube who are telling you, oh, I really like this, and you're like, okay, cool. Well, I have no frame of reference because I've never actually heard an album or a record that you've ever made. Not saying you're not good, not saying you're not experienced, but there's just no frame of reference. Why does that hold any weight? Download the trial, try it out yourself, and make your own decisions. So, all of that being said, let's dig in, all right? Okay. I've got a session here, and I do have a little audio in it, but I don't even know if we're actually going to listen to much audio tonight. Like I said, this isn't about what the plugin sounds like to you, or you know, I'm not going to be comparing things. That's not what this is about. This is a conversation about why I might use something and what it is, because I get this question a lot, and it's funny how it's like I said, I shied away from this. I didn't want to do it. I keep on getting hammered with questions. And I'm like, I'm not going to do the plugin video. I'm not going to do the plugin video because I don't want to be that guy. You guys thinking that I'm like hawking something to you or selling something or forcing my stuff down your throat. This is the complete opposite. But I do want to share with you because you know what? Maybe it might be insightful and it might give you guys some ideas. And you know, maybe then I don't have to answer the same question 10 times. Anyways, all of that said, some business to take care of. If you're not already subscribed, please subscribe. I love, I want to keep this channel going. I love that people are watching. I love that that this is helpful. That's one of the many ways that you guys can show me that you guys do like what I'm doing here, and I'll keep it going. Secondly, I would love if you guys even like take a quick screenshot and share this on your socials. However we can help build this organically would be very, very, very much appreciated. And then the disclaimer part of this whole thing, as you guys will probably see, I don't have any affiliate links. I don't have, the only affiliate program that I think I've ever signed up for is the SoundFlow. And I mean, I don't even think anybody clicked on it. It doesn't matter. There's no affiliate links. I do have relationships with some of these plugin companies. And when I say relationships, do they give me products? Yes. I think every single product, every single company that I'm going to show you a product of, I had spent significant amount of money with them before they gave me anything. And they gave me stuff because I was already using their stuff. So I'm a Waves artist, just to give you guys some frame of reference. And I actually went back and looked and I couldn't get the exact number, but I would probably say that I've probably spent anywhere in the neighborhood of $7,000 to $8,000 or $9,000 on Waves plugins before I ever had any relationship with them. And for you guys who maybe weren't making records or buying Waves plugins in like 2001, the gold bundle in 2001 was like $4,000. So now when they have a sale and it's like $199, please don't bitch. So here we go. Looks like we've got a good connection. I'm going to trust everything's working here. If something starts fucking up, just start lighting up the comments. I'll see you guys and we'll fix it right away. So here we go. Disclaimers out of the way. You guys are going to help me grow this channel. Share, subscribe, like, comment, do all the fun stuff that you guys know that helps guys like me. Let's rock. Okay. So what I wanted to do is, I didn't really categorize this too, strictly, but I'm just going to start walking through. I just basically like put up a bunch of plugins on my session here, and let's just start rocking through this here. Okay. So it's funny. I got a couple comments online about this one. All right. So quick funny story about this. It's not a funny story. I've actually told this story a couple times. This is the Waves SSL E-channel. This is like the OG SSL channel strip from Waves. And I think this came out maybe like, I don't know, 2009, maybe, something like that. I was mixing on a SSL 4000. That was a board that I worked on every day. I worked at the Chop Shop with Scott Humphrey. Long story short, when I started working with him, he had another board. We ended up getting an SSL 4000. All my favorite mixers, all my favorite producers, they worked on SSL 4000s. And I'm like, we decided that we're going to get one. We got one, and I fell in love with the thing. It was like just, the knobs, when you turn a knob on the SSL 4000, it did what I wanted it to do. So when I would EQ something, I was like, it's not like, oh, that's not quite there. I got to keep turning. It's like, no. It was like, I just crank high end. You just crank the knob, and you're like, cool, there it is. You turn the compressor on, and you're like, that's the way I want it to sound. This thing just fits with me. And so there was a time, probably maybe like 5 years after we got that SSL. So I'd spent a considerable amount of time on that SSL when I started having to do mixes in the box. That was right around the time of Guitar Hero. And guys like me were starting to do a lot of like stem mixing, where we had to like match original mixes and then stem them out. And for Guitar Hero and Rock Band, and I was working on a project at the time that we were doing a ton of those types of mixes for. And mixing on a console just wasn't efficient. It wasn't effective. It just wasn't possible. So I had to learn how to mix in the box. This plugin had just come out, and I had tried mixing in the box before. And I had a couple plugins, but most of my work was done outboard stuff. And I had a really hard time mixing in the box. And for whatever reason, it's like, no matter what I did, it just didn't sound the way that I wanted to sound. And then I wasn't enjoying myself, and I was mousing around, and I was just like using like other plugins. And this plugin came out, and I instantly bought it. And I got an Avid Icon control surface, and I basically like set up my whole Pro Tools session and the control surface with this plugin, and just tried to replicate the SSL 4000 experience as much as I could. And I know it sounds like bullshit, and I'm not going to say game changer because it's, well, this one. If there was a game changer, I'm not going to say it. I could actually mix in the box, and I realized later that it wasn't just about the sound, because there were other plugins that sounded good. And like one of the plugins that I really liked back then, I still like now, is the Metric Halo channel strip. That's a great sounding channel strip. And I had that plugin back in the day, but the look of it didn't, like, I was used to staring at a console all day. So now when you're looking at a plugin that just kind of looks more like a plugin, I didn't like it. And I didn't like using a mouse. So when I was able to get this plugin, which sounds the way I'm familiar with, it looks exactly what I'm used to staring at all day, having fun. And now I've got a control surface that I can control all this stuff with knobs. It was a switch flipped, and I'm like, holy shit, I can actually get good sounding mixes in the box, and I don't want to like poke my eyes out with a fork. Like it actually was enjoyable. So this for me is as close to home is like it's this plugin for me. It's so much a part of me that although there are more SSL channel strips. I mean, Waves has 2 other SSL channel strips. Brainworx has the channel strips. SSL's got the channel strips. There are other channel strips out there that sound like an SSL, but the interface doesn't necessarily look like an SSL. There are so many things that do what this does. And some people ask me, why are you still using the original? Isn't there something better? Like, don't you like this better or that better or whatever? And again, talking about why we pick plugins. I have tried those plugins, and yes, they sound good. Do they sound better? Yeah, maybe a little bit. Are the interfaces different? Yeah. Do I like some of them? Yes. Are they familiar? Not really. They're familiar enough to where it's like, yeah, I could probably get used to it. But this does everything I want it to do. And the newer ones, like this, to me, this doesn't have a void that I need to fill. So if it's so much ingrained in my workflow, why would I change that? And that's why I still use it. It sounds great. Is it the most accurate SSL plugin? I don't care. I don't care. Right now, this plugin, when I turn a knob, I know exactly what it's going to sound like in my head before I even turn it. And for me, that is invaluable. That is the most valuable part of this plugin. Okay? So there's this one. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, just talking about the SSL plugin channel strips just in general. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day about the compressor in the 4000s. Some people think like the SSL bus compressor is like the compressor. I'll tell you right now, and I think if you went and asked a lot of the guys who are known for mixing on these boards, this compressor is magic. And I bet, and I'm thinking of possibly doing this, I bet you if I made a plugin or a hardware, if somebody made a hardware that's the channel compressor, like the E-channel compressor, and made it look big and fancy and put some big knobs on it and a nice VU meter, I bet people would be like, that's the best sounding compressor of all time. So just because it's on a channel strip doesn't mean it's like, some like afterthought, half-baked thing. This is awesome. And another quick tip, this isn't going to be a tutorial tonight, but don't be afraid of the fast attack. This with fast attack on is just awesome for so many different things. You could shave off transients like you would not believe. So, okay. Sticking with the waves, because this is also in a lot of sessions that I work on. The CLA 76. Same thing. This to me was so, like at the chop shop, we had 6 1176s. And we had all these crazy like loops so that way we could run the 1170. We'd run out a signal to the SSL. It would hit the 1176, or sorry, what would it do? It would hit the 1176, then go back into Pro Tools and then go to the SSL. So that way we could automate the level after the 1176. And so it was this big, we had so much IO so we could do these loops so we could get our automation after the compressor, but then also be able to get it back on the board to do EQ and any other things and do like our mixing. When this came out, it was like, okay, cool. This does what I expect it to do. Does it line up 1-to-1? Well, no, but neither did the 6 1176s that we had. One of them would sound different than the next. So it's like, are there better 1176s out there? Well, that's up to you to decide. For me, I like the interface. I like the UI. I like the way it sounds. I'm so familiar with it that there's that feeling of kind of like home. And yeah, there are some other 1176-ish plugins that if I'm working with a source and I'm like, this isn't working, do I try some of the other ones from other companies? Yeah, absolutely. Like the UAD Blue Stripe, the Rev A, love that. That sounds to me closer to the Blue Stripes that I've used. It's more authentic, right? But there's some other considerations that I'll talk about a little bit later as kind of like, well, what makes you pick one 1176 over the other? So we'll get to that in a little bit. So this one, again, probably not any surprise. I actually, in my my preferences, in Pro Tools, you can save in your preferences like your oh fuck, what do they call it? Let me look here. Default EQ and default dynamics. My default EQ is the SSL channel strip. My default dynamics is the 1176 or the CLA 76 from Waves. So, okay. I'm not going to spend too much time on everyone because this will take all night. Okay, here's another really cool plugin that I don't see a lot of people using. Wait for this baby to load. So this is the Sonnox Oxford Supressor. This is like, I mean, probably the most used use case for this is as a de-esser, and I do love it as a de-esser. But the other thing that this is really awesome for is if you're working with, let's say, like a vocal that's just got that kind of build up, and if you carve it out on an EQ, you're like, ah, shit, now it sounds thin and it kind of hollow. But if you leave it in, then it's every time he hit the singer hits a certain syllable or a certain word or a certain frequency in his throat, like it just overwhelms. Like this is just great for finding a frequency that's bugging you and dynamically pulling it out. And again, like Fabfilter does this, and I'll show you. I'll get to Fabfilter because I was a late adopter of the Fabfilter stuff, and I mean, now I do a lot of these types of moves with the Fabfilter EQ, but this is a really awesome a kind of like single band where you can kind of like get a narrow band dynamics. And again, I like the interface. I like the way it works. You can solo like the nice big buttons where you can just solo the inside and hear only the frequency that you're looking to take out. There's a fader here that pulls the threshold down. When you're running signal through this, it actually shows you a little bit of a meter, and it shows you what the most offensive frequency is within that range. So there's some really good UI stuff in this plugin. And the other thing that I find about this that I really do like, one of the reasons why I still use it, even though there are other de-esser plugins out there that work great as well. I find this can really like cut into the signal nicely without sounding weird. And I'm sure that has something to do with the way, maybe it's like the way that the crossover points are or the filters work. However it works, you can like really pull out whatever frequency is that's bugging you dynamically, and you don't hear it as much on this as some of the other de-esser plugins. So this is another one that I love. Really, really, really like this one. This is a little bit of a newer plugin based off of obviously a familiar hardware unit. One of the things that you probably will notice is a lot of my favorite plugins are kind of hardware based. And there's two reasons for that. Actually, now's a perfect time to talk about this. There's scientific research, and I'm not a scientist. Never played one on TV either. But I have actually gone down the rabbit hole a little bit about this. There is absolute, like science proof that your eyes and what you're looking at can influence the way your brain interprets what you hear. So, trying to think of a good example of this, but basically what the research has concluded is when sound waves go through your ears, your brain has to interpret that, right? And if your eyes are closed, you've just got the sense, whatever, you've removed that sense. So your brain is not getting that signal from your eyes. Like it's just, maybe there's some vibrations that you're feeling, whatever else, but your eyes and your ears are very tight. Like the way your brain interprets that are actually closely tied together, and what you're looking at can actually influence what you hear. So on a meter, does it spec out to be exactly the same as, let's say this is the distressor, right? Is this exactly the same as the distressor? And if I close my eyes and I listen, or if we put it on a meter or whatever, is it? Again, I don't care. But when I'm staring at this and I'm using it, and it actually does sound like a distressor, but when I'm staring at it, in addition to using it and using my ears, it sounds closer to a distressor than if this UI did not look like this. And that's not me being full of shit. That's my brain playing tricks on my ears. So I'm a UI junkie. Like I love certain plugins because the UI influences my brain a certain way, and then I'll hear it. And obviously it's got to be close. Like it's not out of left field. But if you skinned like the stock Avid compressor with a distressor look to it, that might be my favorite compressor. So, and I've done this test. I have done this test, and it's pretty funny. So if you want to go down that rabbit hole of science and understand like why sometimes we like things better, we like to use certain things better than others, your eyes can sometimes play a trick on you. So anyways, this, I actually have a beat. I used to have a bunch of distressors, and a lot of the guys that I work with, distressors are, in my opinion, probably the most versatile compressor out there. And if you're going to have a couple anything and that's all you're going to have, like this is kind of my go-to. So anyways, this is the plug-in version of it. It does what I want. It's familiar. It's got so many extra controls here above and beyond what the hardware has. And you can just get this compressor to very quickly and easily kind of sound like whatever you want. So like I said, love the interface. It's very familiar, again, because I'm used to using distressors for a very long time. And it sounds like it. It looks like it. This, to me, is... I use this on a lot. This is probably, aside from the CLA76, this is probably like my next go-to. You're like, I need to compress something. If it's not on the SSL channel strip, it's not on the 76, the CLA76, the next thing I'm going to is going to be the Arousor. The other thing that's awesome about this is they have a DSP version. So I'm on an Avid HDX rig. So I've got DSP chips like the old HD or the old TDM rigs, and that just allows you to do a lot of stuff with no latency, live recording, blah, blah, blah. There's a bunch of benefits to running plugins in DSP mode. And when Pro Tools switched from, I think it was the HD cards to the AAX format, when I went from like TDM to AAX, a lot of plugin developers for some reason dropped support for DSP. So here's another consideration. So we've talked about, obviously, number one, consideration, how does a plugin sound, right? You like the sound of it? Awesome, cool. Second consideration, we've already talked heavily about, what does it look like? And don't be ashamed to say, I use this plugin because it looks fucking cool, or it looks like a piece of hardware I like, or the knobs like just are easy to work with. So that's like kind of like the third thing. Is the UI easy to work with? Do you like using it? Are the knobs and the controls in the places that you instinctively go, or are you searching around for this, and when you grab the knob it kind of acts funny? Like, these are all considerations that I make when I'm picking my tools. And it's all a trade-off. There are plugins in this batch, like we've already talked about a couple of them. There are plugins in this batch that probably aren't as authentic, maybe don't sound as quote unquote good, maybe don't have as many features as something else, but I like the way it looks, I like the way it feels, and the sound is close enough and does what I want it to do. Perfect. We're going to roll with that. So the fourth consideration for me is there are plugins, there are companies that continue to make DSP. If I have an option to use, I don't know, pick a plugin, a de-esser, like we just talked about the Sonnox Supressor. If there's an option, a suitable option, and all else is equal, I will buy from the company that makes a DSP version of that plugin. And I will use that more often than not because I've got a DSP system. If you're not on a DSP system, don't worry. But that is a consideration for me. And so I love this plugin because I can track with it with no latency. I can obviously mix with it. I can put it on auxiliary returns, and it doesn't add to the delay compensation as much as if it was a native plugin. There's a bunch of benefits to the DSP if you've got a DSP system. So that's the Arousor. I'm going to skip over a couple because these are a little like more specific ones. Any questions on anything so far? Let me just have a quick peek at the chat here. Danny, Waves Gold was like $700 in 03. Oh man, I think it was more than that. Well, maybe they made a native version at that time. I had to get everything in TDM, and they charged more for the TDM. Hammer, does anyone actually leave the analog noise switch on when using? So it defaults to off now. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but they changed that a couple of years ago. The ones that just add the hiss, literally it's just hiss. Those have, I think they've defaulted to off now. What else we got here? You know what? It's interesting. Some of it's, I wish, you know, some of these YouTubers, I mean, I'm kind of becoming a YouTuber, but, so I don't mean that in like a derogatory nature, but I would really love if these guys really want to do something helpful. Why doesn't somebody just like go through a 2-hour video and pull up every single plugin and determine what the quote unquote analog saturation, whatever, on just every plugin and let us know? Because the other thing is Waves, and like I said, I'm a Waves artist. I love Waves plugins. You're going to see there's a lot of Waves stuff I use. I'm not a Waves hater. And it's not because they give me free shit. I already bought all the stuff that I use before I became a Waves artist. But I think that they scared a lot of people off from using like the analog button or the THD knob or whatever. There are some companies that is actually a useful part of the plugin. It's a useful component, and it's actually adding some useful harmonics or some dynamic harmonics that changes with this, depending on what the signal is and what's going on. And I think a lot of people just like knee jerk turn all that shit off because, you know, yeah, we got fed plugins that just had hiss on them for hiss or hum for, I don't know, felt like 10 years. So I would love it if one of these guys would go and just do that. Maybe I'll do that. It seems like a lot of work, but you know, hey, maybe it's helpful. So, totally off subject, but I loved your Nail the Mix. It was a goldmine of information. Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I love that. It was fun to do that. And I'm probably going to do another one at some point. So, 4K channel compressors, pure bliss. Yes, it is, Jordan. Absolutely is. Yeah, the channel compressor is highly underrated. And I think ultimately, it's funny. Here's the other thing we were talking about the channel compressor the other day when I was having this conversation. It's funny how all of these plugin companies are like, auto gain. We've introduced auto gain to our plugin, update, blah, 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 whatever, auto gain. Do you guys see a makeup gain anywhere on here? They had auto gain figured out in like 1978 on a console. So come on. It's not that big of a deal. It's awesome. Believe the H delay Kyle, great point. I was actually thinking of the H delay analog button. That actually does stuff. Yes, and I leave that on. I've got H delay in here. It's one of my favorite delays. So, yeah. But the problem is you're using a Waves plugin. You see the analog knob. You're like, ugh, just turn that shit off. It's not doing anything good because half the other ones weren't, right? So that's why, like, again, testing this stuff is fun. Like do your own testing. Sometimes, like, again, I'm not trying to get you to turn off my live stream. Stay on my live stream. Watch my YouTube videos, please. But the time it takes to watch my YouTube video, you could probably go and test half of these plugins and decide for yourself whether or not the analog thing does anything. So, yeah. Like, 45 people instantly leave. Don't go. Do you have any theories with the online obsession of owning so many of the latest plugins that are interchangeable? I do. So I'm like one of those guys who has, well, here, let's have a peek. Let's have a peek into the madness. Here's my plugin list, everybody. Those are EQs. That's dynamics. Here's our pitch. Reverbs. Delays. Modulation. Okay, you guys get the point, right? Some of you may have heard me bitching on social media about how long it took me to do a clean install on my new computer. It was weeks. Like, it was crazy. I have so many fucking plugins to install. I'm gonna do a whole other live stream on like plugin managers and install files and all that stuff, because I think that's a big broken part of this whole business. And here's another consideration. Having gone through this clean install, there are companies that I will no longer spend a single dime with until they fix their install process. And I won't get into that now, but that might be in a couple of weeks. You're going to hear an hour-long rant over these companies that don't seem to have a problem releasing a new plugin every month, but they can't figure out a way to get the fucking plugin manager like somewhat reasonably efficient. Or even have a plugin manager or licenser manager or any of that thing. So anyways, going back to your question, there is an obsession with owning everything except for that it's interchangeable. And you say, well, Chris, you just showed me 2,000 plugins. The reason why I own as much as I do is because I do a lot of mixing for other people. And unfortunately, the day and age that we're at now is everybody's a producer. The guitar player in the band's a producer. The singer's girlfriend's a producer. The A&R guy's uncle's a producer. Well, he probably actually is a producer. But you know what I mean? Like, everybody's a producer. So everybody's got a Pro Tools rig. Everybody's got their plugins. And some guys have lots of plugins. Some guys don't. And then they make all of these really heavy-handed moves in the box. They send you a mix. They've been living with a rough mix for the last like 6 months, and then you have to mix their stuff. And if I even veer a little bit away from that, sometimes you get the knee jerk of like, oh, that doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound the same as the thing I've been working with. But you also need to have flexibility to then tweak to actually make the mix work, because if it actually sounded great the way they wanted it, they wouldn't be hiring me to mix. So I need all these plugins so that when some people send me stuff, that their plugin actually pops up. So I've just acquired stuff over time. Obviously, I'm always trying stuff out, but I'll do the trial. I'll get the trial. I'll try it out. I'll be like, yeah, that's useful. I like that. I like the interface. I like the way it sounds. This simplifies a process that I've done with something else. This could take the place of it. Yeah, you know what? I'll buy it. And there's also something to be said for supporting companies. If and I know this, this might sound a little righteous, so please don't take this the wrong way, but if there's a company out there that makes plugins, and let's say they make 20 plugins, and everybody who buys one of their plugins only buys one, even though it's a really good plugin, and that's all they buy, that company's probably not going to be able to either develop more as quickly. They're probably not going to be able to support it as well. They're just not getting as much revenue. So a lot of the times, if there's a plugin from a company that I like, and the company is like, okay, this is reasonable, it's reasonably priced, looks good, they've put in like good effort into this, obviously the plugin fills a need that I'm looking for. If it's kind of like, oh, here, buy the one plugin or buy the 4 plugins in the bundle for like an extra $100, I'm that guy who's always going to buy those extra 4, even if I never use them, because I just want to, I do want to kind of keep, especially with the smaller companies. I know that selling a $29 plugin, even though you've got 10 of them, if you just sell one of them, that business model doesn't really sustain for very long. And then next time Apple decides to do a crazy OS update, that company's not going to have enough money to do compatibility updates, which is what we're all experiencing now, or we've been waiting for the last 2 years. So, I mean, that's a whole other rant I can get down to, but that's why I have so many. If you are a bedroom producer, if you are working on your own stuff, you're not getting sessions from, 100 different clients a year, there's no reason you should have 15 1176 plugins. Do a shootout, pick the one you like that sounds the best, rank it. Be like, what sounds the best? Perfect. Give you top 3. Out of those top 3, which interface do you like the best? Perfect. Out of those ones, I don't know, maybe you don't do 3. Maybe you pick the top 5 sounding ones, whatever. You got to determine what your criteria is. But like I said, my criteria: sound, look, feel. And when I say feel, obviously I can't touch it, but like, are the knobs in it, are the knobs a good size? Are there buttons for things, or is everything a knob that you drag? Does it react the way that you want with your mouse? That's a pain in the ass. I've got control surfaces, but still sometimes using a mouse is quicker. The thing that I've really gotten into, actually, because there are so many options, is, and I've been lucky enough to meet a lot of the people who make these plugins. I've started picking plugins based off of which companies I like the best, who makes the best plugin installer. But if you have an 1170, if you have 5 1176s and they all sound really good, and out of those 5, there's like 2 that are really cumbersome to use for whatever reason, the way that they made their UI, it doesn't appeal. Lose them, gone. The 3 that are left, if there's a company that has a really bad support install process, maybe they're slow to do updates, they're slow to fix bugs, they're slow to respond to tech support inquiries, out, gone. The competition's too good. You're out. Now we're down to 2. And you know what? Having 2 1176s, if they do the exact same thing, I don't know, just flip a coin. But you got to have your own way of evaluating these things, and then get rid of the ones you don't want. Or if you're doing trials, you shouldn't even buy them to begin with. Think of all the money that we've wasted on plugins that you really don't use. I mean, like I said, I probably got tens and probably like $20,000 worth of plugins that I don't even use. And so I'm guilty of it too. I have to be disciplined. It's Black Friday month. Now it's become Black November, I guess. And I'm tempted to buy more shit too. I thought I owned everything, but maybe I don't. So anyways, I'm going on a rant. Sorry, guys. So yeah, you don't buy everything. Buy what you need. Figure out your system for evaluating. Figure out what's important to you. I know some guys who don't care what the UI looks like. They love those plugins that like don't even have a UI. They look like they're still being programmed. They're still being coded. You shouldn't care what a plugin looks like then. If that's, don't pick something based off that. I love the way plugins look. Like I love a certain look. I'm going to gravitate towards those. But also, Waves is killing it with the innovative plugins for songwriting productions, in my opinion. You know what? Like I said, we'll talk about Waves in a little bit, because I'm actually a very big fan of Waves, regardless of my relationship with them, regardless of getting access to betas and having presets and whatever. Like, forget about that. They could just turn off that right now. I still own everything that I use every day. It doesn't matter. I think they're doing some great stuff. Obviously their PR sucks, but it's a different thing. Sorry, Waves. It's getting better. It's getting better. I'm kidding. Chris, for clean installs, a program called Install PKG that will do all your Oh God, don't tell me that. I just threw up in my mouth. I wasted so much time. That's cool to know. Thank you, Jordan. I will definitely look into that, and everybody else should too. Softube install manager sucks. I don't know if I had that many problems with that ones. Schmerler, charge it to the session. I'll charge everything to the session. No, you can't do that anymore, unfortunately. SSL plugin manager is the model everyone else needs to follow. It's so good. Cool. I'll check that one out too. I don't do their subscription, but I do have a bunch of their plugins. Curious, are there any plugins that didn't make the jump to M1 or never updated AAX from R-Test TDM that you missed? Yep, absolutely. The TDM jump, there was somebody told me that they actually made new ones, but I haven't gone back, so they might be available now. But the one of them that didn't make the jump right away was a company called GRM Tools, and there was a plugin. I think it was called like the Pitch Accumulator or something like that, and it was a very unique kind of like pitch spread thing. I mean, it's all over a bunch of Rob Zombie albums, and the GRM Tools used to be like one of like the go-to standard plugin bundles that people had in like 2001, because there wasn't a lot of stuff, and that was one of them that everybody had, and that one was good. That one didn't make the initial jump. The whole M1 thing, I'm still dealing with this. So I'm still running Pro Tools in Rosetta. Half the stuff in my plugin folder still won't run natively. So it's a little bit of a mess. I'm sure there's some other R-Test TDM stuff that I missed. I mean, we didn't have Echo Farm for a while. Amp Farm. Here's a quick funny story about Amp Farm. So Amp Farm was used all over the place for years, and Amp Farm didn't make the jump for a while. Now you can get it. And there was I can't remember which Nickelback album I was working on. It might have been Feed the Machine, but we were we were setting up, I'm trying to remember what it was. I don't know if Chad had moved or something, but we were going through gear and we were like putting together the studio to start really kind of like working and recording. And we started kind of like going through, we found some old hard drives. We started going through some old hard drives and like kind of like as we were mining for gold, like little riffs that never made it to other albums or like never got finished or whatever. And everything had amp farm on it. And we're like, fuck, everything pops up, but there's no amp farm. And we started talking about how like amp farm just had such a certain sound that just worked really well in that kind of like, you know, early mid 2000s, like active rock stuff. Like that sound is just so that. And so long story short, we were all like bummed out that like, we're like, fuck, why don't they make amp farm anymore or whatever. While we were going through like cases of gear that came from Chad's old house, we found an old TDM system, computer, 888, like the whole TDM system. And thank God there was a bunch of iLocks taped to the side of the computer. And it was like the old gray and white G4. Anyways, we hooked this thing up. We got it working. We loaded up Pro Tools. I ran basically like a signal loop in and out of the old TDM rig through an 888 with amp farm on one of the plugins. So we could plug in a guitar to a DI. The DI would go into the TDM system. The output would then go into my like whatever Avid interface I had at the time. And like, that was like the guitar simulator. And so after all of that bullshit, I'm like, there's gotta, like, we can't have like an old G4 running Pro Tools TDM just to use amp farm. So then I decided to do a bunch of tone matches with the Fractal. So I've got Fractal presets that are amp farm. A modeler modeling a modeler. There you go. And actually amp farm is a model of the pod. So it's a modeler modeling a modeler of a modeler. Whatever. Funny, man, the shit that we do. Don't need to do that anymore. I'm sure there are a bunch more TDMs that didn't make the jump. There was a lot of really good stuff. BF76 is so good. BF76, that's like one of those plugins where it's like the fact that they made it look like an 1176 almost did it a disservice, because it actually, I mean, it sounds like 1176. To me, it doesn't respond the way an 1176 is. It's awesome. But when I'm looking at it, I'm expecting, again, talk about the way my eyes influence my ears. The BF76 I look at and I'm like, I want to hear an 1176. And what it's doing to me isn't the 1176 thing as much as other things. And so that one, just as good as it sounds when I close my eyes, or if it's on a track and I'm like, man, that track sounds good. Somebody sent me something and I see it's the BF76. I'm like, oh yeah, I love that. It does sounds great. But there's a disconnect with the way it sounds and the way it looks to me that almost throws me for a loop. I actually don't use it that often anymore. But it does sound good. Somebody should make that plugin and just change the interface so it doesn't. It's not supposed to be an 1176. Stayed away from UA as I didn't want to be surprised by new DSP hardware reviews, but their native plugins are winning 10% in all my shootouts. Yeah, I'm glad they finally went that way, even though I've got 3 different UAD DSP things. Yeah, see. Anybody who bitches about having to buy any of this like native stuff for like $49 and stuff like that, remember there are guys like me who have spent tens of thousands of dollars on hardware, DSP, cards, chips, boxes, plugins. It's like stuff right now is so cheap. And I know, that's easy, for me to say. It's like I make money making records, so it's easy for me to put the money back into it. But like, honestly, when Waves has a $29, sale on a SSL channel strip, it's like, that's a no-brainer. So BF76 so good. Unfortunately, not Pro Tools. Yep, that happens. Dad Valve has the shittiest UI. Oh, DAD Valve, but it sounds so good. Yep, exactly. For clean install. Yep. Love install SSL channels. Classic. Awesome. Cool. Let's keep going. Thanks for all the questions. This is awesome. Okay, I'm going to skip over a couple that I just put on this. You know what? I'm not going to skip over them because then I'm going to miss them and not come back to them. Here's an interesting plugin. So this is from Boz Digital. This is a gate But the cool thing about this gate is, like, you can just use it as like a regular noise gate like this, or you can have it's basically like a crossover point where it will only gate above or below wherever your frequency slider is. So this is really helpful with, like, I mean, now there are a ton of plugins that do this, but this was one of the first, and I know Joey Sturgis had the Tominator that kind of did a similar thing, which I also like and use a lot. That's the thing. A lot of these plugins, there's like probably 2 or 3 equivalent plugins that I also use every once in a while, or if for whatever reason this just isn't working, I'll jump to another one. Or if I didn't have this one, I could jump to. Like, there's very few plugins that I'm like, I can't live without that. There's a lot of substitutes. So if you don't like the way Gatey Watey looks and you're like, I love the Tominator, buy the Tominator. Like, plus the name's fucking awesome and Joey's awesome. So it's like, why not, right? But I actually really like this interface, and I like the way it reacts. And this is a really useful gate for when, like, let's say like you're gating like the snare bleed of like hi-hat bleed. You can set this up to only gate out like above 2.5K. So that way the fundamental of the snare keeps ringing, like it's untouched, but the high end gets gated out based off of what you're doing. Okay, shameless plug. I gave a disclaimer at the beginning of this. Shameless plug. I've got a cool plugin coming out soon. I can't give too much information about it, but I do have a plugin coming out soon with the Drum Forge guys. I've got a drum sample library coming out with them that's kind of got a unique use case, and we built a plugin specifically to use with it, but that can be used on a bunch of other stuff. And the reason why I'm telling you about it now is because I'm showing you a gate plugin, so you guys can connect the dots. It's going to be cool. Here's another classic. This is still, in my opinion, I could mix every record for the rest of my life with a bass DI running through this. I don't need anything else. I mean, I like other stuff. I've got a bunch of other bass stuff. I love the Dark Glass plugin, and obviously the pedals are great. I love the Dark Glass plugin. I love some of the amp sims, some of the bass amp sims. Like, yeah, great. This for me, man, it just does what I want it to do. It has all the functions that I need. It's simple. It works because it's an Avid plugin. It has a DSP version. Great. I love this plugin. I love the way it sounds. It does what I want. I use this for filtered vocals. I use this, I don't know if there's a song I've mixed in 10 years that this hasn't been on the bass, at least mixed in with whatever the other bass sound was. I'm sure there is. There's probably a couple, but I mean, like, this is just so part of like the way that I hear bass in my electric bass in a rock song. This on the SVT, the factory preset 30, like, this to me is like done. DI through that, done. Perfect. I just got a question. Use that for the main bass sound or blend with the DI? I mean, if you gave me that and I couldn't blend in the DI, I'm good. I typically blend in the DI if the DI is giving me something. It depends on the context. Like, if I need, obviously, like, that saturates and distorts and kind of, you lose a little definition, but it gives you this really solid bottom end and this growl that's like hard to do with a lot of other plugins. So if you need definition or if you need something from the DI, yeah, mix it in. But if not, done. So I love that. Great. Like I said, great for filtered vocals. I'll use that for even like if you want like a special effect kind of guitar thing. I mean, there are so many great amp sims, which we'll get to in a second. Another shameless plug. There are so many great amp sims, but that SansAmp thing has almost like it sounds a little fake, which is sometimes what you want. It's funny how we've gotten so hyper focused on making everything just recreate hardware in the real world in the plugin. That's great because I appreciate a lot of that, but it's also cool to have tools that, like, yeah, I don't want it to sound like a real Marshall amp. I want it to sound almost like a shitty like Rockman or like DI going into like a distortion unit, like just straight into the board. Like, sometimes that's cool for effects, and the SansAmp is like my go-to distortion box. This one will look familiar because I think we talked about it on a couple videos ago, or maybe the last video. This, I'm sorry for everybody who doesn't use Pro Tools, because apparently I think somebody told me they don't make a VST or an AU version of this, but this is, man, this, I told the story about how I got off SSLs and how I started mixing in the box based off of like a couple plugins that just looked and looked and felt the way that I wanted them to react based off of what I was used to. This got me off using, got me off, chop that up and remix it. This facilitated my exit from using tape machines. After watching those videos I was telling you about that guy roasting the YouTube guys, I'm like, oh God, I got to be really careful about what I say, because he was cutting together some pretty fucking savage stuff. So anyways, this is awesome. I love this plugin. It can be subtle. It can be aggressive. The different modes, like you can just quickly put this on and just grab, hear the different modes, find the character, the curve that you want, and just roll with it. And dude, it's great. It's great. So if you use Pro Tools and you want like a kind of like a tape tube kind of saturator thing, like this is great. Here's another gate plugin. This is actually my new favorite gate for drums. It's called Drum Gate. Really unique name. So the Oxford Drum Gate, again, I don't love the UI, but the UI is really, the UI is it makes sense. And it does what it's supposed to do. And the nice thing about this that's so great, number one, it's got a leveler built in, so it can even out sounds, which is great. You can basically run the track and learn all of the hits. And then if there's some that you got to go in and highlight and remove or add, like it missed something, you can do that. So it's not like you have to automate it or like set the threshold to something weird and then automate the threshold. Like you can, it's almost like if you went and almost like made a MIDI trigger and then, cleaned it up after the fact. Like it's pretty cool like that. The other nice thing about it is the decay time, kind of like the Gatey Watey, it lets you have a longer decay time for everything that's kind of in this frequency bell here. So you can find the meat of whatever it is you're gating, and you can gate out the shit below it and the stuff above it. One of the cool uses I actually used this on recently, there were a couple Nickelback songs that I mixed on the last album that had a lot of bottom end in the kick drum. And it was glorious until like we went and mastered, and I was just like, oh God, this is wrecking the mix. I thought it was awesome, and it's just like, it took it too far. And my fix was basically going and putting this plugin on the kick bus and just basically gating the low end. So the low end would just gate out quicker, and it did the trick. So it's not always just about getting rid of leakage. Like this plugin's cool because you can just kind of tame frequencies. Again, I could have done that with Fabfilter. I could have done that with a bunch of plugins, but this was just the one that I did it with. I think I already had one of these on it that was getting rid of some leakage, and I just adjusted it to kind of help tame the low end. So there you go. This is, like I said, my favorite drum gate right now. Maybe it might not be your favorite. Again, I'm just sharing you with my shit. I'm not trying to sell you stuff. Of course, I just said that. I'm not trying to sell you anything. Buy my plugin. 50% off at mlsoundlab.com. Oh, sorry. My timing's impeccable tonight. Reverse engineer. I actually am trying to sell you something. I don't care if you buy this. I do care if you buy this, but like buy it because you like it. Don't buy it because somebody told you it was cool. This is, again, shameless plug. This is a plugin that I partnered with ML Sound Lab for. It's obviously, yes, sorry, somebody just mentioned the Oxford drum gate's missing a sidechain. 100%. That's the only thing that, like, in my opinion, that isn't making it like the best. There's still times I can't use it because it doesn't have a sidechain. Anyways, going back to this. Diesel VH4, in my opinion, is probably one of the best guitar amplifiers of all time. And yeah, call it what you want. It's so versatile. It sounds so good. It sounds the way, like, all the channels have a use. The distortion sounds the way that I like guitars to sound. If you don't like it, fine, get something else. But this is my opinion, so I'm sharing it with you. And so the thing with this plugin was there are other VH4 plugins out there, and I have a VH4. I used one at the Chop Shop for years. A lot of my favorite producers, a lot of my favorite session guitar players, some of my favorite albums. A lot of people don't know about this amp, and if I went and if there was a database of like music from like late 90s to like, I don't know, 10 years ago, if there was a database of like rock music, and like this was probably used more than just about like any of those other amps, because so many of the session guys were using these, so many of the producers that were doing a lot of what we were hearing on the radio for like 15, 20 years were using these things. Aside from like, obviously, like, you know, Adam from Tool was using them. I think James Hetfield started using them. Yes, of course. But these are like the secret weapon to guys that you maybe don't know their names, but they've played on like half the records that you love. So long story short, it's a big amp. It's expensive. It's it doesn't have to be super loud, but it is super loud. There's just a bunch of reasons why I wanted to do a VH4 plugin that actually, in my opinion, sounded like my VH4, because the ones that were out already didn't sound the way that I wanted them to sound. They looked great. They looked like it. It just didn't sound the same. Didn't sound the same as the ones that I had at the Chop Shop. It didn't sound the same as the ones that Tommy Lee had at the Atrium, and it didn't sound the same as the one that I have. So I'm like, okay, I want to make like a plugin that sounds like mine. And if I'm the only guy who likes it, I'm the only guy who uses it, well, then it's perfect, because I don't have to mic it up anymore. I can go and fly out to Vancouver to work on a project, and I don't have to bring it with me. Like, it's just for obvious reasons why plugins are so awesome. So anyways, quick plug for this plugin. Miko at ML, I annoyed the shit out of those guys for months, unfortunately. They make some great plugins. And when we were developing this, we got it to a point where I think everybody thought it was good to go. And I was like, it's not quite there yet. And there were a bunch of things that kind of is like, yeah, it sounds really good. It's really usable. But I know everybody says this, but it's the truth. Like we took this to where I think most plugin companies would have put it out. And I was definitely getting pressure to like sign off, and I'm like, no, it's not there yet. And we took it even closer. So is it 100% authentic? If you scoped it, it's going to get really, really close. Blind, really damn close. In a track, indistinguishable. And I've used this all over stuff that you guys have, this plugin. I've used this plugin all over stuff that you guys have already heard, and that people have commented how great the guitars sound. So again, shameless plug, but even if this had somebody else's name on it, if it was somebody else's, I'd be saying the same thing. This is an awesome plugin. It really does sound a lot like the VH4 that I have and that I'm used to, and it's very versatile. Unfortunately, it's not super well known. So I think a lot of people kind of just didn't really dig into it. The goal with ML is we were actually going to develop 6 amps, and I don't think the other 5 are going to happen, because this one actually just didn't sell that well, because just of kind of a lack of awareness and a little bit of lack of marketing. And I think just people didn't really know what this was, and they thought it was just a metal amp. And yeah, it does that, but it does a bunch of other stuff. So probably won't be doing the other 5, unfortunately. But yeah, if you want an amp sim that can, like, channel 1 super clean, channel 2 has some really great crunch tones, 3's like just the quintessential active rock rhythm guitar sound, and 4 can get pretty gainy and good lead channel. I mean, this is a great one. So they do free trials. Check it out. This is probably only, like I said, I'm not here to sell you anything. No, I'll sell you. Check it out if you haven't. It's actually, like I said, if somebody else's name was on it, I'd be saying all the same stuff. This I could probably do again just about every record for the rest of my life, with potentially this for guitars. Maybe a couple other things here and there. So, all right, I feel dirty. I'm moving on. All right, I'm gonna have a quick look at the chat room here. Yeah, somebody got the meme. I know. It's the ugliest plugin, but it sounds so good. I think we were talking about the drum gate on that one. No, that couldn't have been the drum gate. What was that? The SansAmp, maybe. I know it's off topic, but do you have a go-to DI? So interesting question. Talk about being a gear nut. And I used to like go down the rabbit hole and like AB DIs and all this shit. To be perfectly honest with you, my whole philosophy over the years has changed to just go in to record as clean as possible, and then use all of the amazing tools that we have in here to kind of like dirty stuff up and fuck stuff up. So I used to use Avalon DIs, the U5s. They were kind of like the standard for a long time, and they sound great. I actually recently sold. I had a pair of them. I sold them. I just wasn't using them a lot. I've got a Grace M108, which is like an 8-channel preamp, super clean, and it's got some DIs on it that I really like. They're just very clean, don't do much. But to be honest with you, like I've done a bunch of records where the Omni, the Avid Omni, which is kind of like their all-in-one unit, that was like our travel rig, and we went straight DI into that thing. I mean, I don't know if that thing's any good, but it's like, it's DI, it works. And then once you start putting stuff on it, it's like you either like the sound or you don't, and you can start molding it. There's been the only thing that I don't like about DIs typically is if they're not like full bandwidth, or if they're noisy. So I'm not super particular about DIs as long as they are clean, like they're not noisy and they're not rolling off the top end too much or getting rid of bottom end. So, but I'm not fussy on them at all. What do you use Phoenix on? Kind of everything. So when I first started using Phoenix, I was recording drums to 16-track analog tape. And once the drums were done, we'd also do rhythm guitars to that. So the first initial use that I used Phoenix for was I put one on every channel of the drums. And then once all the drum editing was done, and instead of consolidating, this is before commit, I routed all those tracks to a new set of new tracks and printed it with Phoenix to simulate the tape machine. So I would do that with drums and rhythm guitars. Now I find myself using Phoenix on vocals when I want to kind of like smooth them out or give them like some like perceived energy without them getting harsh. I put them on guitars a lot, that harsh guitars where I just want to like, again, smooth them out, but not smooth them out to where like, oh, now they're not exciting. Like Phoenix smooths things out, but then also brings stuff forward. So it's not, I find like when you're trying to like take the edge off things, sometimes then they kind of like disappear or they become kind of soft. Phoenix, I think this actually, I don't think I've ever really articulated it this way, but Phoenix for me smooths out kind of harsh or like overly transient or pokey material without making it sound kind of like smooth and lifeless or boring or kind of dull. It somehow keeps it exciting, but gets rid of the kind of smooths out the ugly shit. So hopefully that answered that question. Sonnox drum gate for the win. Yeah, love it. It is missing the sidechain. Love the Baseford CV4. Yeah, thank you, buddy. It is Baseford, the #1 game changer plugin. Yeah, no kidding. Totally not a game changer. You could honestly make records with like Amp Farm for the rest of your life, but for me, it's like I said, that's my go-to amp simulator plugin for a reason. Shameless plug. Yeah, that's what I got to do. Get it? Plug. Oh fuck, that's such a great pun. Shameless plug in. VH4's rock. Looking across the room at one right now. Man, see, I would be interested, Jordan, if just like, because I know, again, like amps are amps, right? My diesel has, I don't know what tubes are in yours, but I think mine has the KT77s. the ones at, we have one at we had one at the Atrium, Tommy Lee's place, one with EL34s, one with 6L6s. They all sound a little bit different, but obviously mine I matched up to my amp, which is KT77s, but interested to see how close it is to yours. Kyle can confirm CV4 sick, using it on a mix right now. Thanks, Kyle. Got one, 2 amazing amp super studio tools, so much there. Yep, exactly. So good. Gonna buy it. KT77. Okay, well then you know what? My plugin probably sounds very close to what you got there, Jordan. So yeah, if you're ever traveling or you ever need to send something off to somebody, or you're having somebody, record guitars remotely, just send them that plugin, give them your settings. That was the other thing, is like there was a bunch of, when we were developing that plugin, me being just a neurotic, obsessive compulsive, like pain in the ass. It's funny because ML came out with, after we released that plugin, they developed what they referred to as Vorna technology. And it was basically the thing that they did to fix kind of the issues that I had with where it was at, kind of like caused a little bit of a redevelopment of kind of what they were doing with their technology. But it got so, like, we were able to get it so close that it was very interchangeable with my amp. And yeah, it was a fun process. I was hoping that we'd be able to do more, because I've got a couple other really awesome amps that I think you guys would dig. So, but anyways, if you're doing any remote guitars, or having somebody else do it, but CB4, mess with it tomorrow, do some comparisons. Awesome. Yeah, definitely do that. And if you like it, or even if you don't like it, just shoot me a message, either in a comment on somewhere online or here or wherever. Let me know kind of how it shakes up against yours. So, all right, let's jump back into this. Man, we're talking shop. I thought for sure, I'm like, I'm going to have to tell a bunch of stories. We're not going to, I'm going to blow through these plugins in like 20 minutes, and we're not even on the second channel yet. This one doesn't need a lot of explanation, other than I didn't jump on board onto the Fabfilter stuff because I just don't like the interface. Or I thought I didn't like the interface. But I use this a lot now. I find it super useful. This is a really well-designed plugin. This is probably without a doubt, the most flexible and versatile plugin probably in my entire arsenal. Like, you can kind of do everything. Mixed with the EQ, you can make all these dynamic. There's a little bit of the AI where I can't remember what button is. I don't actually use it that often, but there's like the button that will listen to the signal and kind of show you all of like the suggested EQ points. Like, there's so much in this plug. I don't even know like probably a tenth of what this plugin can do, but what I use it for is just like very like, basic surgical carving and like taming and controlling stuff. It's awesome. Don't need to go too much deeper on that. It's crazy. Here's another awesome plugin I love, and this is like, again, talk about hardware. So David Beneath, I'm sure all you guys know who he is. An amazing producer, great guy, fellow Canadian. This is like his recreation of with Boz Digital of the Compex. Well, I maybe this is the vocal stressor. I can't remember. The Compex, I think, was in the vocal stressor. It was like one channel with the EQ. But basically, for me, like the gold in this is this section right here. There's a really, I don't want to say super popular compressor called the Compex. And just for that like big smashy, like just demolished, crushed sound, this compressor, and especially when you can get the limiter to engage, just smokes. It's awesome. The EQ is great too. I don't dig into the EQ a heck of a lot, but it's nice to be able to kind of like, carve out some of the harshness before you smash a drum room with this, or put it on a drum bus, or even smash a vocal with it and add some top end. And this is an awesome plugin. If you haven't checked this one out, definitely play around with it. Very colored. This is not a transparent EQ or a transparent compressor. This is like when you want smash, Hulk smash, go for this guy. And this is, like I said, this is like a recreation of a Compex, which is just, I didn't realize how rare Compexes were. The very, very first like real studio that I worked at in Toronto was Sony Music. And the engineer there that was kind of my mentor, Lenny DeRose, he had a Compex. And I mean, I didn't know that much about anything back then. And I just assumed, I'm like, wow, this is all kind of like standard gear. And I don't think I saw a Compex when I left Sony and I went to LA. I don't think I saw a Compex or heard anybody talk about a Compex for like 10 years. And I thought it was just like everybody knew what the Compex was. I thought everybody had one. I thought they were like an LA too. Like everybody's just got one in like all the big studios. And I didn't see or hear anything about it for a long time. So I thought it was a popular thing, but it actually turned out not to be. But now I think it is more with the plugin stuff. So I'm going to come back to the Wave Studio rack because that's like a whole big conversation. Looks like we still got good tech here going. We still got a good signal. Excellent connection is what YouTube is telling me. Okay, let's open up this. So here's another channel strip that I really like. I mean, there's a bunch of API stuff that I really do like. Yeah, Compex. They are amazing, but once you get it set up, do not touch anything. Oh yeah, and the hardware versions, the knobs were really light. I remember like trying to recall those when I was an assistant with Lenny, and you'd recall them. And I remember like even looking at the knob, like it would move. Not really, but like it felt like that. And I remember when we would have to recall a mix and I would get everything back to where I thought I had it. And it was like, it doesn't sound the same. And then you'd kind of have to recall it by ear. You'd have to play the thing through and just hopefully it was loud enough in the mix that you could kind of like dial it in. But yeah, it was a finicky beast. So this is kind of obvious. This is an API channel strip, and it's got all the API stuff. Sounds good. Love the interface. Has everything you need in it. I mean, this is just kind of like a no-brainer plugin that when I want the API thing, I do love API compressors. A lot of people don't dig into those. I really like the API compressors. I obviously like API EQs. A lot of people like that. And I actually do, talking about like the Waves noise stuff, I actually really like the Lindell plugins. I like their saturation stuff. So I actually will push that hard and drive this more so than I will on other plugins. So yeah, don't have to dig in too much to that. But yeah, I really do like this plugin a lot. When I want a different flavor from the SSL, that's kind of my next in line. Here's one of those plugins that, well, I'll say plugin companies. This is a good example of a plugin that I own a bunch of their plugins for kind of two reasons. The first reason being, hopefully Pro Tools didn't crash here. Come on, you can do it. There we go. The reason that I love these plugins so much, and then once this thing loads, you'll see what it is. It's a McDSP, and this is their 6060 channel. Yeah, 6060. And it's like a channel strip that you can just kind of build. And it's got modules, and it's got a bunch of awesome stuff that you can throw in there. But I've used McDSP plugins for a long time. Back in the day, they were one of the few companies that this was like before the SSL channel strip, where they had like their filter bank and their compressor bank and even like the G channel, kind of like without making it look like the hardware, it actually sounded like hardware, like analog hardware. And so I was using their plugins way back when there wasn't a lot of other options. And then as other options came on board, I started kind of just going to different things. And I kind of came back to McDSP a couple of years ago when a lot of plugin manufacturers dropped the DSP stuff. McDSP kept it going. I mean, they had to. It's in their name. This one actually doesn't have a DSP in there, but like they've got their like their analog channel and their filter or filter banks and stuff like that. They still do the DSP, which is nice because it lets me run it live. Like I said, it lets me run it live. It lets me run it. It lets me put it off of the DSP chips, which frees up my CPU. Oh, I'm pulling up all the ones that don't have DSP on them anymore. Or did the DSP not work on the M1? Maybe that's what it is. Maybe I didn't install the DSPs. Oh, maybe I didn't install the DSPs. Anyways, like Like I said, I'm on a new rig. Cut me some slack. But McDSP is just a really, they make great sounding plugins. Their interfaces I like enough, and I think they're a really good company. They have, you know, they're a little bit more expensive, but they bundle their plugins. They update their plugins usually pretty like good. They get rid of bugs pretty fast. You know, they don't drop DSP support the minute Pro Tools changes cards. Like they're a good company. And so there's a couple clients I work with that use a lot of their stuff. And so I bought it so that way I had access to that. But then I bought more stuff and I've used more of it because of that. So that's kind of like one of those scenarios, like I said, where it's not always about the sound. It's not always about the feel. Like, yeah, it needs to sound good and it needs to look good and all that stuff. But yeah, the McDSP stuff I've kind of come back to mainly because of, you know, the DSP options and just them being a good company. And I actually don't have a relationship with those guys at all. I don't know them over there. But here's another great plugin. So again, when I first went to LA, there was a piece of gear that all the guys in LA had, but I never seen in Toronto before I moved down. And it was a SPL Transient Designer. And we had, Scott had a bunch of them at the chop shop. And I'm like, these things are just magical. There's two knobs. There's an attack and like sustain. And it's a compressor that just magically, like, you don't have to worry about gain reduction, this, that, the other thing. You're like, if you just want more attack on the front end of something, you turn up attack. And if you want sustain, you turn up sustain. And if you want the opposite, you want to like shave off the transient of something, you turn down. You turn down the attack, and if you want to kind of almost like gate something or do almost like an expander or like an expander kind of thing, like you could do that too. So I use the Vitalizers all over the place, and when SPL made a plugin of the Vitalizer, I used the Vitalizer plugin on everything. This plugin kind of does what the Vitalizer, or it's not the Vitalizer, sorry, Transient Designer. This kind of does what the Transient Designer does, but it just gives you so many more options. And so this is a really, really awesome tool for just being like, I want more attack on something. And you just go, bam. Or I want less attack. Done. You don't have to worry about, you know, release times. I mean, you can adjust them, but like for the most part, like this just really works. So I love it. Great plugin. And that's a Drumforge Transient 2. Love it. Okay, I'm going to do this next batch and then we'll go back to Studio Rack. I made all these inactive just so that way wouldn't have any issues with the CPU. Not that there's that many plugins in it. This is awesome bus compressor. It's a Plugin Alliance, Brainworx, Townhouse bus compressor. I never used a hardware version of this. I'm not familiar with it. Apparently, it's almost like a Uber modified, like SSL G-Comp kind of thing. Sonically, it gives me that kind of thing. It can kind of you can get aggressive with it on a bus, either like a whole mix or like a drum bus or vocals or whatever. You can get pretty aggressive with it, and it just sounds really good. I find if I'm not using my hardware inserts on my master, this is one of the compressors that I will put on. To me, it just sounds like kind of like a bigger, I don't want to say more full frequency, because I don't know if that's necessarily what it is. Like it comes across, maybe it's because it's adding more harmonics to make it just feel like it's got more bandwidth than like the SSL G comp. But yeah, I really love this compressor for bus duties that you would maybe use an SSL G comp on. So here's a plugin that I actually own the hardware version of, and I love the hardware. And I was actually thinking of selling it, so I bought this plugin to compare it, because I'm like, oh, if the plugin sounds like the hardware does, then I can get rid of the hardware. And it's really, really, really close, and I could probably get rid of the hardware. I haven't sold it yet, but I still have it. But this is a great like saturation, distortion. To me, anything that you just want to, like, it's kind of like a more aggressive version of Phoenix with more options. Like you can dial in more, like you can control the top end, you can control the bottom end, you've got more options with what the distortion's doing. Highly recommend this guy if you're looking, if you like distortion or you like saturation, not in like I want like a tube screamer on something, but you just want to kind of like dirty up a sound, or you want to shave off some transients and just smooth things out or fatten something up. This is a good option. I know there's a lot of plugins in this vein these days. I just like the way that this one operates and the options it gives you. There are options, but not too many, and they make sense to my brain. So, and to my ears. This is a good one. Okay, you guys still with me? Hopefully you are. I'm blowing through these plugins fast, but we'll do a Q&A here in a second. Here's a really interesting plugin. I've been doing what this does really elegantly for years in a slightly less elegant way. This basically just, you use a sidechain input and you just ducks a frequency. Every time a kick hits, it ducks that frequency in, let's say, the bass. Every time the vocal is singing, it ducks. You can set it to duck a frequency in, let's say, like the guitars. So the guitars kind of duck a little bit, but only in that frequency. It's not ducking the whole thing. When I need more control, I love this. This is simple. It works. It's easy. It's fast. It's great. It does what it's supposed to do. When I need more control over what's happening, I use this, which is the Avid Pro Multiband. And I'll just turn off all of the bands that I don't need. Like I'll just get rid of them, right? So I'll just find, if I just want to duck low end, I'll just do like one of these things, and I'll just duck the low end off the key input. And this gives me a lot of control. But if I'm just like quick and dirty, Trackspacer is awesome. And that's something that, it's interesting. That's like a technique that a few of my favorite mixers have been doing for many years. And it's been kind of like, I don't want to say their secret, but it's like been like a really big component of how they are able to get a certain sound. And I feel like recently, like there's been a lot of kind of like auto versions of this, whether it be like a Gullfoss or, like the Soothe or whatever, where it's just kind of like ducking frequencies like automatically. You can do a lot of that stuff with more control using some of these multi-band compressors. And instead of just letting the algorithm do what it's going to do, you can kind of set up chains to duck certain frequencies keyed off of other tracks. So like I said, the obvious one is, for me, I love lots of low end in the kick and in the bass guitar. I don't like this one above the other. I kind of like them to coexist. So I use Trackspacer on the bass guitar bus, and I key it off the kick drum. So every time the kick drum hits, it pulls out the low end from the bass guitar, and then as soon as the kick drum's done, the low end goes back in. Another great use for it is, like I said, the other one that I thought was really good was for guitars. So if you've got really mid-range forward guitars and they're fighting with the vocals, depending on what the guitar parts are, you can use that technique to duck just certain frequencies in, let's say, the guitar bus. So that way it makes a little pocket for the vocals without having to start like carving into EQ and making things sound not necessarily the way that you want them to sound. So here's another good one that I don't know if I've ever seen anybody else use this plugin. It's called Satin by Yuhi. Love their plugins. This is a company. I hate their install process. I hate their authorization process. Very cumbersome. There's a separate installer for every plugin. There's a separate code for every plugin. I buy the whole bundle and I get penalized by having to do the same thing like 12 times. It's like, no, make it easy. But that being said, this is an awesome plugin. It's like a tape simulator. And talk about options. Man, this thing's got so many options that I probably don't even really use, but you can dig in and really tweak the way that this thing sounds. And obviously it's got presets. But there's a couple of really unique things that I love about this plugin. Number one, you can set up groups. So that way, let's say you have one of these on all of your drums, you can assign them to a group, and then to group one, and then when you change the parameter to really tweak it, it does the same thing across the whole group. And it's a really unique way of being like, you don't have to figure out the sound on like one element and then just copy that around. You can put it on everything and tweak it in real time, hearing the whole drum bus or hearing all of the guitars or hearing all of the vocals or whatever. But why I bought this plugin and what I use it the most for is there's a piece of hardware called a Dolby A-type noise reduction unit. And I actually just sold a pair of them. And basically in the old days of tape, when tape was really noisy, they would figure out ways to get rid of the tape hiss. And Dolby came up with this process that they would basically really mangle the signal on the way to the tape machine. So the tape machine could almost get more like bandwidth and more, it almost like be like bit depth. It was like, how do we make this 16-bit thing turn into 24 bits, and then we'll kind of turn it back to, we'll get rid of all the shit that we had to add to it later and turn it back into something, but without all the junk. And so that's what Dolby did. But a lot of guys figured out if they would encode a signal with the Dolby unit, but not decode it, it had this really cool, like super hyped high end, almost like you scooped out the mid-range and rolled off the low end and just squashed the piss out of it, like multi-band. Like it just does this weird thing to it that sounds really cool. So I've been doing that thing for years with the Dolby, and I had to buy the hardware, and they're noisy and they're heavy and they're hot, and it's like whatever. This plugin has a Dolby A-type encoder. So I can run this without the tape circuit, and only the Dolby encoder encoder without the decoder. And it's also got, a lot of people modded the A-type cards to kind of give you that effect, but in almost like a slightly more usable way. So they also gave you that. They also gave you the B-type. So I bought this for what's called the Compander component of it, but the whole tape saturation part of it sounds really great too. So this replaced my Dolbys. Avid Pro Sub. There's something called the DBX 120 Subharmonic synthesizer. I'm a huge Randy Staub fan. He mixed some of my favorite albums when I like huge influence on me. Love the way his stuff sounds. I mean, I probably subconsciously aspire to sound like Randy Staub, although I'll never be able to sound like he does. But there's a lot of what I do that I'm like, I don't try to chase his style, but I just love it so much that it just ends up, when I'm doing my own thing, it ends up being kind of like that. And one of the things that I know he used to use was this DBX 120. And I mean, a lot of guys used them, but he knew how to get it just right. And so this subharmonic synthesizer is kind of like does what the DBX 120 does. But the nice thing about this one, Brainworx makes one called the Subsynth. That's like closer to the 120. The nice thing about this one is it has a MIDI input. So what I do is whatever like the bass guitar is doing, I'll make a MIDI track of that. So that way it's following the notes, and I'll trigger this with the MIDI. So that way it always tracks it properly. Problem with the 120 is sometimes it wouldn't track right. And in a mix, no big deal, but it would sometimes sound a little warbly because it didn't know which note it was supposed to synthesize. This, if you're feeding MIDI to it, it knows exactly what it's supposed to generate. So it's pretty awesome. Okay, we're going to go back to this plugin. And this is another one I don't see people using a lot. And I'm like, this thing's just a beast, as it's taking forever to load. This is a plugin called Studio Rack. This is from Waves. And once you play around with this, I don't think this is a secret. And if it is a secret, well, I'm sorry, Waves, for spilling the beans. But it's pretty obvious. Anybody who's used like the Waves CLA vocals or like the JJP, you know, artist series, or like Eddie Kramer had one, and I think Tony Maserati had one. Like, they basically built these plug-in chains for you and then gave you like one fader control. And actually what that fader control was doing was like actually changing like 3 or 4 parameters on those various things that were in that chain at the same time. Anyways, awesome plugins. This was the tool that they used to build those plugins. So that way, like, you know, CLA could go and build his chain the way he want. And then they have these macro knobs that you can assign like multiple parameters to. So when you turn the knob up, it might pull the low end down on one EQ, and it might turn the high end up on the other, and it might add more compression, all with one knob doing that, right? And so eventually they built, or they released Studio Rack so we could build our own plugin chains. And I went crazy with this thing when it first came out. And I've got some really like just gnarly routing and crazy stuff. But one of the really cool things about this, well, there's like 3 or 4 really cool things about this. Aside from being able to get like, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 slots of plugins in one plugin, it has this thing called a parallel split. So you can basically have parallel channels all within here and then feeding into all of your other plugins. It's got something called a multiband split. So it lets you basically turn any plugin you want into a multiband plugin. So I can have a 1176 here, 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 and here on each different frequency, and then have it all summed back together. So like, this is crazy. This is crazy. And I don't see anybody using this thing. Once you build these chains, you can assign the knobs or the certain parameters to these macro knobs. So you don't actually have to like go in and like dig in to all of the individual parameters. So here's something. I've got 2 presets that I've got 50 presets for this, but here's 2 that Waves included with Studio Rack. I'm going to show you them really quickly. So this is like what I call like my lead vocal chain. And without having to open up to see everything that's in it, I can very easily make a lead vocal sound like really good, really fast, just with these knobs. But then if you want to open it up and see what it is, I've got saturation. That's just smoothing out everything. I've got a vocal rider, which is an awesome plugin in itself. If you guys don't use this is great for like, again, evening out vocals without having to jump to a compressor. This is a little bit more of a transparent way of getting the level a little more even. So that kind of preps the vocal level for me. Then I go into an F6, which I've got frequencies optimized here for like the most typical like problem spots. And they just pull them down whenever they exceed a threshold. The F6 is an awesome plugin. I put a VEQ4, which is like a Neve 1081 kind of style EQ, to just give it a little bit of top end and bottom end. And again, that's here. I don't have to go into the VEQ. I can just add some top end and pull out some high mids. And that's when I add top end or pull out high mids, it's also doing a few more things. You've got a de-esser, sibilance, a great de-esser. Like I said, I love the suppressor. This is also a great de-esser. I use it all the time. And then an SSL channel with, again, a couple like basic things that I do to pretty much most of my vocals. Okay. Here's another awesome thing about this plugin. If you're like, yeah, whatever, I don't need all that stuff. If you use Pro Tools and you've got plugins that are from other manufacturers or don't even make a Pro Tools plugin, but they make a VST plugin, check this out. You can load as long as you have the VST version loaded on your system. I can put right in the middle of my Waves vocal chain, I can put, I don't know, pick one. I can put a Fabfilter. I can put a metric halo channel strip. I could put a plugin from Arturia. I could put an auto tune. in the middle of my Waves channel strip. And this all just has one takes up one spot. So I use this a lot for, like I said, I use it for like prepping tracks. Like I'll have like my lead vocal. If I get a vocal that wasn't recorded well, I'll put that lead vocal thing first in line, and that will just be like, oh, if it had been recorded well, that's kind of what it's supposed to sound like. And then I'll do a bunch of processing outside of Studio Rack after that. But this thing is awesome. And I definitely, if you haven't played with this, like this is a massively important tool for all of us. And it can be as complicated or as simple as you want it to. But even just as being a VST wrapper is pretty awesome. Any questions about anything? Trackspacer Studio Rack? Yeah, Kyle, you know, Studio Rack. I've been saying it's great. I mean, I don't use it all the time. Like I still like having, I do like having the plugins separate. I like being able to, on my control surface, like hit a button and pull up the SSL, and then I can use my knobs on my my Rock Solid audio controller or my S1 or whatever. Like I still like the plugins outside of Studio Rack, but for like really complex chains that would have taken like my bass preset. If you download Studio Rack, check out my bass preset. My bass preset, I basically built what I do in a mix session. I've got like 4 tracks of additional bass tracks next to whatever I was given to mix or whatever we recorded. And it's stuff like amp simulators, subharmonic synths, SansAmp. It's all this stuff. And then I process that on a bus, and it's like does all this stuff, and it takes up, it's like 6 tracks and a bus and a bunch of like multi-band stuff that I have to use a certain plugin because that's a multi-band, doesn't exist for the one that I want to use, blah, blah, blah. I can do that all within Studio Rack. So just for shits and giggles, download Studio Rack, check out my bass plugin, and just look at like how that works, and you'll be like, oh shit, like this is cool. So good to know we can do the Dolby A trick with Satin. I have, and I didn't know. I bought the AudioThing Type A plugin for that. Yep. And you know what? If you like AudioThing Type A, good. Don't buy Satin just because I use it. Or try it out. Like I found when I got Satin, and I was looking for a way to replace my Dolbys because one of them was getting noisy. I ended up getting it fixed, and it was fine. But I was starting to worry. I'm like, shit, is this thing going to die on me? And I need another option. And I tried, there was another one. I'm trying to think of who makes it. There's another one out there that looks more like a Dolby A noise reduction unit. And it's good too. It didn't sound the way that I expected it to sound based off of my Dolbys. Maybe whatever Dolbys they matched it to sounded close. I don't know. I can't remember what the other one is. I own it because somebody actually sent me a session with it. I'm like, oh, cool, I'll buy it. And then I tried it, and I was like, yeah, it's not the same thing. Kept on using my Dolbys, and then I eventually found Satin. I haven't tried the AudioThing one. Could work great. And if it does, you don't need to buy 10 of the same plugin. Don't buy 10 of the same plugin. If the AudioThing works for you, roll with it. Okay? All right. Obviously, we've been focusing mainly on like mix stuff. And obviously, like, you know, you can use this stuff when you're producing and tracking as well. But I also wanted to, somebody asked just a question. Is there an advantage of using Pro Sub on bass versus using a sub bass sine wave virtual instrument since you already have the MIDI? No, you can kind of do the same thing. You just then have to like carve out the sine wave. The subharmonic synthesizer has like the Pro Sub and the DBX 160 has 2 bands. So it has 2 octaves. So you could do that and you just spread it across 2 or either 2 oscillators on the synth, have one at one octave, one at the other. Yeah, you know what? That might be actually a better way to do it. But the reason why I do it that way is because I used to like not have the MIDI all the time. So I can still use it if I don't have the MIDI. It just doesn't track as well. Whereas if you do have the MIDI and you just want to use like a sine wave, like on a synth and run a couple different octaves, you could totally do that. Might be cool because then you can actually change the sine wave to, maybe you change one of them to, you know, a sharper a sharper oscillator to make it a sharper wave to make it maybe stand out a little more. That's a good idea. And it's funny because I get a lot of stuff from other people, and they've programmed in a bass like sub, like a Moog sub kind of thing. So, do you use a process to intake, try out new plugins? A go-to project you know really well, perhaps. What was your other Dolby? Yes, it was Dopamine. Thank you very much. It was Overloud Dopamine. So I don't have a go-to track. I usually, when I'm trying out plugins, I will usually use it on whatever I'm currently working on. If it's like a really specialty thing that I'm like, I know there was a track that I did that, like I really like leaned heavy on whatever that effect was, I might pull that up and then see how it stacks up against whatever I kind of my, standard status quo at the time was. The problem with the channel strip problem, and this here, I'll just kind of give you an idea of kind of, again, why I'm on that SSL channel strip, aside from the obvious reasons of why, like, it's good, but why, like, the whole muscle memory and just everything's where I want it to be. I'm so used to it. It's familiar. Like, the idiosyncrasies I'm familiar with, like everything, it's just so familiar. The only way for anything to knock out that SSL channel strip out of my go-to would require like me not being able to use the SSL channel strip and having to use another one for 4 months. And then all of a sudden now that's like, oh, now that's home, and so a lot of this, like the effecty stuff, I'm like, yeah, like I'll try stuff out and I'll A/B it and I'll decide if I like the interface better and stuff like that. Some of my tests, I know I'm like, the only way to evaluate this is to use it exclusively, to force myself to use it for an entire project. Actually, I did that maybe about a year and a half ago, maybe. I mixed an EP for a band, and it wasn't a big active rock thing. It was a little more like rock country. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to force myself to use a different channel strip. And I think I used the AMEK, the Plugin Alliance. Let me pull it up here. Which one was it? Yeah, this is what it was. This guy. I forced myself to mix an entire EP with this on every channel. And I actually really, 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 really liked it. And so I find myself, if I'm doing something that's not like just like aggressive rock, if I'm doing something that's maybe like a little like cleaner or like ballady type stuff, or even like some country stuff that's not like, like bro country stuff, then I actually really liked this plugin, and I will go to use it on every channel instead of the Waves SSL. But the only reason like I was able to kind of like it was because I forced myself to use it and like became familiar with it. It's almost like when you're a kid. Like I've got little kids who like sometimes don't eat anything, and you're like, you're gonna eat this for dinner, and then like a year later they're like, oh, I love red peppers, and you're like, yeah, you hated red peppers a year ago, and I just forced you to eat them for a year, and now you like them. And it's like, that's kind of how I have to deal with channel strip plugins. I just have to like force them. So, do you recommend using saturation or distortion plugin on distorted guitars, or tape saturation plugin? Do you recommend using saturation or distortion plugins on distorted guitars, or tape saturation plugin instead? It's so case by case scenario. Depends what you're trying to do. If you're trying to make if the distorted guitars don't sound distorted enough, if they need to sound more aggressive, and that happens all the time, like somebody records distorted guitars, and then by the time the rest of the track is on it, like those distorted guitars are almost too smooth, then I'll go with like a distortion plugin, like a decapitator or a magma tubes, or I think it's called magma tubes, the Waves distortion. I'll go heavy distortion, and I'll just add some edge to it. If the guitars are too edgy and I need to smooth them out, that's when I'll go to like tape saturation. So it kind of depends on what the problem is. if you hadn't watched some of my other videos, one of the things that I really preach is something, I mean, it can be summed up with just like purpose, like have a purpose. So you can figure out if you trace back, if you start at what's the problem that you're trying to solve, that will dictate what you need to do. So you just need to like go to the very, very, very beginning of like the decision-making hierarchy. And that will instruct your direction as to where to go with what plugin to use, what EQ to use, how much to use, what compressor. Do I compress? Do I not? What do I set the attack time, this or that? What's the problem? And like really work through this. Guys like me or other mixers who have been doing this forever, that goes through our head. It just goes really, 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 really fast. So when I put a compressor on something, I'm not just putting a compressor on something. I've asked myself like 15 different questions, and depending on the answer of the first question is going to dictate the second question, and then that answer dictates the third question, and then that answer dictates the fourth question. So if you're guitars, when you play a guitar track, I'm getting a little off topic with the gear thing, but this is important. And this is something that I really want to preach to you guys, because this is a big part of my philosophy, is having purpose and having intent and knowing why you're doing something. If you get a guitar track, or if you're mixing and you're like, okay, I'm going to start focusing on the guitars, and you're listening to a guitar. If the guitar sounds good, you don't need a plugin at all. If there's no problem with that guitar, you don't need a plugin. Okay? I have a plugin on every track because I like it set up ready to go, but that might be an SSL channel strip that has zero, like everything's zeroed out. If there is a problem, what is the problem? Guitar has way too much bottom end. It's like woofy. It's woofy. It's just taking up the entire track. It's undefined. Okay, cool. All right, well, now you've got like 2 or 3 options. What can you do? You can roll off a bunch of low end. Okay, if you're gonna get rid of low end, now you got another decision to make. Are you gonna use a high pass filter? Are you gonna use a low shelf filter? Are you gonna use a tilt EQ? Like, you've got all these tools, right? What are you gonna use? Well, then depending on what you're gonna use might then dictate the next question of, okay, well, is there a better tool for this? Or if I do that, how is that going to, like, if I use a tilt EQ, well, now it's going to add top end. Do I need top end? I don't need top end. I just need the low end gone. Well, maybe I need to use a multi-band compressor, and just because the low end's not bad on everything. It's only bad when he just like chugs on a palm mute. Like, there's all of these questions that are going to inform what you do. And if you haven't asked yourself what the problem is, or if you haven't determined what the problem is and asked yourself how you're going to fix it, you shouldn't have put on a plugin on to begin with. Like, you're not there yet. And so if you're starting out, or if you're still learning, or if you're even like guys like me, I still sometimes have a paper and pen and write down problems so that I can be super hyper aware of them in mixes. Be like, yeah, there's vocal, it's got a nasal frequency to it. That's harsh. It's bugging me. It's messing everything up. Now I'm really hyper aware of that problem, and I can fix it, as opposed to just starting to pile EQs on and just hope and pray one of them just fixes the nasally mid-range. That's not how you mix. And so the guys who can consistently do good sounding mixes and typically can make a career, hopefully a long one out of it and a successful one, are the ones who that decision-making process is happening so fast. Subconscious, but those questions are being asked, and that decision-making hierarchy is being worked through really fast. So hopefully that helps. So yeah, when you ask kind of like, what do you want on something, it's like, what's the purpose? What's the purpose? And that's like, I mean, that's mixing. That's mixing. Kick drum. Somebody gave you a kick drum. What's wrong with it? Nothing. Sounds good. Cool. Move on. Snare drum. What's wrong with it? Too much hi-hat leakage. Okay, how do I get rid of that? Well, gate it out. Okay, start gating it out. Well, now I'm like, it's sounding unnatural. Okay, well now what other options do you have at it? Okay, well maybe we try like just gate out the high end. Okay, cool. That sounds good. Okay, now toms. What's wrong with the toms? Well, they sound terrible. Like the toms we're tuning were bad. Okay, well sample replace them. Done. Moving on. Like you got to just go through the decision-making hierarchy. And then once you've done all that stuff and you're hearing everything in context, then there's a whole bunch of other problems. It's like, well, the guitars are too loud, but when I turn them down, now I can't hear them. And it's like, well, that's not a volume problem then. Now that's informed your next move. This is all like, when I was a kid, they had these books called Choose Your Own Adventure. And it would be like, you'd start reading the book and you get to page 4 and it would be like, you're in the jungle and there's a tribe of, whoever chasing you, and you get to the cliff. What do? Do you turn around and let them take you capture, or do you jump off the cliff? And if you jump off the cliff, you're like, I go to page 75. Then you flip to page 75. But if you don't jump off the cliff, if you let them take you capture, you go to page 44. And the story is vastly different depending on all these little decisions you're making. That is mixing. So, I digress. Where did I leave off? Oh, well, here's a perfect example. Here's a tool. Oh no, we already went through on that one. Oh, never mind. Sorry, losing my spot. We've been covering like mixing stuff. I want to show you a couple production plugins that I just really love. Okay, and if you're just looking for mixing stuff, you can go grab a coffee or a beer or whatever, and you ignore this. But these are 3 plugins that I use all the time. They're my go-tos. I get a lot of questions of people being like, "Oh, what drum program should I use?" Oh, whatever, blah blah blah. This is Superior Drummer 3. It to me is the most powerful like drum programming software you can get. Most flexible, most powerful. It's got great sounds. A lot of people have done a lot of different libraries for them. There's so many different options. The way that you can mix the drums within this, the way that you can export them out of here and print them on separate tracks. You can fake a real drummer, in my opinion, better with this than any of the other programs. If you just want to use this to enhance a drum kit, you can do that too. Yeah, great plugin. This is that's my go-to drum programming program. And you can import your own samples into it. A lot of people don't know that. So you can get a drum kit and then layer your own samples on top of that, which I do. Here's another plugin I use all the time, Trillion. It's an oldie but a goodie. This is like a virtual instrument. And obviously it's got a lot of synth bass stuff, but it's also got some really, really, really cool like electric bass stuff that sounds really good. And so I use this a lot for programming bass. Sometimes this ends up on the record. Sometimes the sound of these basses that are in this sounds so good, even when we have a bass player then play on it and give it some real feel and they kind of give their flavor in their parts. I've figured out little tricks and ways to then tone match our DIs so that they sound like Trillion. Like this is just fake bass guitar, like mecca for me. And there are other like TuneTrack's got a really good bass program that is actually probably more functional than Trillion. It's called Easy Bass, but I like the sounds in Trillion are just so good, so good. Here's another plugin that is kind of like my all-in go-to synth. Will, my man. Oh God! If you're not looking at the comments, everybody look at what Will Thompson just wrote. Will, how are you, buddy? Man, it's been too long. Me and Will have seen some shit. Will used to work with me at the chop shop like back in the day. Holy shit. You're not supposed to tell people about the bassists. I don't know if we had Trillion back then. If we did, I think a lot more bass players probably would have got replaced. Anyways. Oh God, this is hilarious. Oh man. I've got a real. I can't tell it. I was about to say I got a really funny bass player story. I can't tell it. I'm sorry. Sorry for the tease. Arturia Analog Lab. This is a really great plugin. Oh, Will, no, don't apologize. It's awesome. I love it. I'm like crying, laughing a little bit. It's so good. This is one of those plugins. It's like all in one. Every synth sound you could want. You can search presets. You can once you find a preset you like, you can open it up. By now, if you've stuck with me for the last, what are we at? 2 hours? Yeah, we're at 2 hours. If you stuck with me for the last 2 hours, you know I like UIs that actually look like real stuff. And so, yeah, no wonder I love the Arturia stuff. So this is kind of like all of the Arturia stuff like crammed into one plugin. And it lets you, and like just the search capability of like, if you're looking for something, you can access all of the synthesizer modules all in this plugin without having to like be like, do I want the Prophet? And then you try to work with the Prophet. And you're like, yeah, I don't know. Let's go to the Prophet VS. And like, then you're reinstantiating plugins and stuff like that. This is kind of my go-to synth plugin. Kind of has everything in it. And I love the interface. Okay. All right. Let's, man, this is going on for a while. I hope you guys are hanging with me. I know it's getting late. I'm going to try to blow through these as fast as I can so we can do a little Q&A at the end here. Yeah, Analog Lab is awesome. Okay, so we're going to get into like my returns, reverbs and delays. Okay. I'm like I said in some of my other videos, I'm a little bit of a dinosaur. Like I got used to things early on in my career that still kind of work and still like sound the way that I want them to sound. So I used to use Lexicon 480s and 960s in the hardware days, and I got used to them. I liked the way they sound. I liked I liked this weird fader interface. You know, I love like this is just very familiar to me. And so when companies started making like these recreations of like a Lexicon 480 and they sounded really good and they looked like it, and it just for me, it just works. I've got my various, not presets, but I've got like my various like starting points and algorithms that I really love in the 480. A couple of them that I use all the time. Brick Wall might be my favorite 480 plugin or 480 algorithm for like drums or short rooms. I love Ricochet. It's a really cool, like almost like stadium sounding effect. Obviously, everybody knows the A plate. I really love the fat plate as well. And some of these random halls, like the large random hall here, is something that I use a lot. Yeah, I mean it get a little unwieldy, but I like that one as well. So yeah, Relab, these guys make some awesome plugins. Another reverb that I really like. This isn't as popular, but it's the Eventide SP2016. There used to be a version of this. I think it was called like the Princeton Digital 2016. But this is I love this for it's like for like short rooms. This for me, if I want to make something like, if I want to like almost like fake, if I like recorded a guitar player in like a big studio, not like a arena or whatever, but like a recording studio, but a big room. And I set up like room mics on the other side of the room, and I want that sound, or I just want to put it in a space. This is one of my favorite reverbs for that. Don't want it to be like this big long thing. I just want to make it not feel dry, feel like it's in a space, but not really hear the reverb a lot. That's one of my favorites. This is become a new favorite. The Waves Magma Springs. I really like spring reverbs, but I find them like, it's so like hit and miss. One spring, like I like the UAD AKG spring, I think it's like the BX20 or something like that. I like that. But then there's like 4 spring reverbs plugins that I don't like. And then some of them have options for like tuning in the bass and the treble, and some of them don't. This is really great because it just gives you like there's 3 flavors in here I really like. I really like the Motor City, I really like the 50s, and I really like the California. The other ones are like, yeah, they're okay, but like they're great. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 spring reverbs in one. 3 of them I really like. And that's kind of spring reverbs for me. They're hit and miss. Okay. This is an interesting reverb that probably wasn't actually developed for a guy like me. I've heard of a lot of guys, like post guys, using this plugin, and I've heard of a lot of like guys who aren't doing like rock stuff. I don't know any like rock or like pop guys who are really using this. But this, if you dig into this and you really, like, obviously it's got a lot of parameters, but if you really dig into this and make yourself some presets, this is one of like the most like realistic sounding reverbs I think I've come across in a good way. Like some real, like sometimes you don't want it to sound real. You want it to sound like a Lexicon 480. But for reverbs that you want to hear, not like the ones that you're just like, I want it in a space, but I don't really want you to hear it. Like this, like I want to hear the reverb, but I just want it to feel and sound real. This thing just sits in a track so easily. And I have a lot of problems with reverbs where I'm like, too loud, too quiet, too loud, too quiet, too loud, too quiet. There's always something a little like I'm always chasing that back and forth. This thing just like sits in the track and it's like, I can hear the reverb, but doesn't feel too loud, but I can still hear the reverb. And I find that to be problematic with a lot of reverbs. So that's a cool one to check out. Here's a really, really expensive, really rare, it's really, really high end. If you can't sense the sarcasm in my voice, good old faithful D-Verb. Talk about a shitty interface. If this thing looked like a piece of hardware, everybody and their mom would be like, this is the best sounding reverb that you can buy. But because it's free with Pro Tools and it looks like shit and whatever, people like discount it. The stock setting on this plugin has probably been on more tracks than any other stock setting on any other plugin. I guarantee it. The stock setting on this just like works for when you're like, what happens? Here's what happens with me. I use this plugin when I'm tracking vocals because there's a DSP version that's low latency or no latency or very little, and it takes up very little power. Like the session runs really smooth with this plugin on it. And so I use this while I'm tracking. And then what ends up happening is like you get it sounding so good while you're tracking, like you start just tweaking things and adjusting things, but you can't take this off because then you start getting the latency and all that other shit. And then what ends up happening is you get to a point where like, cool, this is sounding good. And you're like, why change it? And then you look at like a final mix and you're like, oh man, the reverb on the vocal sounds awesome. What is that? And you're like, oh, it's the Hall D-Verb Hall, large Hall. I love the non-lin setting on it as well. So yeah, don't discount that. This is like a really effecty plugin. This is the Valhalla Shimmer plugin. And Eventide has a plugin called Shimmer. I think it's called Shimmer Vibe or Shimmer Verb or something like that. And it kind of does a similar thing. This one's just really easy. It's like super easy to use. I mean, Shimmer Verb's easy to use too, but this one I find just like very easy to tweak. It just always kind of does that shimmery, like delayed pitched thing. Like you want to like volume pedal with a guitar or doing like oohs and ahs and stuff like that with this on it is just like, you forget synth pads. Like you can make your own synth pads with this plugin. Awesome, awesome, awesome. More of an effect than it is like, oh, I want to make my singer sound like he's in a stadium. That's not what that's for. Okay. This is good. We're making progress here. Delays. I love delays. I love delays probably more than I love reverbs. And this is a delay that I like Soundtoys plugins a lot. I don't love Soundtoys as a company. I've had a couple issues, like just like tech support issues. Obviously, they don't develop a lot of new plugins. They don't update stuff that often. Like it's just kind of like a slow churn. But devil's advocate to that, I've been using this plugin for how long, and I kind of can't find, even though I try, I can't find a delay plugin that I like better, that gives me all of the options, that gives me all of the flexibility, that just does what I want it to do and does it easily, and gives me the flavors. And like this is, I don't know. I just complain that they don't update their stuff, but I'm like, I don't know, how are they going to, like, what would they do to make this plugin better? I don't know, and I'm usually full of opinions on how to make shit better. So here's another plugin that, again, like, this thing just works, and the analog does something. I love this with the lo-fi setting. I love this when I want like the bouncy guitar, like the Edge U2 thing, or like with a piano where you're doing like a single note piano, distorted piano, where you want it to go like that kind of shit. I love this thing. It's great. It's great. Just the sonic character of this, again, just fits in a mix really well. I actually have never like scoped this to see what kind of the EQ curve of it is, but it just really works well. Soundtoys, the Buckleys of plugins, they just work. Yeah, exactly. And I like I said, I mean, I didn't mean to like rip on them. If I don't know if I really ripped on them, but I don't know. They've just been kind of stagnant, and you know, I found a few really, really major bugs in a plugin of, well, their whole suite of plugins back when I first got on the Icon. And it really fucked me up, and I reached out to them, and they were very dismissive of it. So it kind of turned me off. And I'm like, I'm not going to use I'm not going to use Soundtoys plugins ever again. And then I'm like, tried to replace them all, and I couldn't. They're just too good. So here's another really cool character delay. This is from Pulsar. It's called the Echo Rec, and I think this is like the Binson Echo Rec platter EQ or platter delay. Really great. And this is another one that's like, I'll use this on guitars. Like, and getting a guitar player to play through this is just like super vibey for like little slapbacky things. It's just got a really cool texture. This is, again, this is like a really colorful flavor delay that I use a lot, like for specific parts. Like I want to produce a part, or I want to make a part special. Like I'll go to something like that. I'll jump over the one plugin really quickly here, because we were talking about Soundtoys. Here's another Soundtoys. Will Thompson, you'll recognize this bad boy. We used to have the hardware versions of these at the Chop Shop. This is based off of a Lexicon Primetime. And we had a stack of these in the tech room. I think, I don't know, we must have had like 8 or 9 of these things. And what would happen is, they would like go haywire. Like you would be sitting there, and sometimes it would freak you out, because at the Chop Shop, we always had everything set up. Like everything was always patched in, ready to go. And you'd be sitting there, like maybe doing a recall or something, or you'd be like eating lunch, and maybe if the speakers were on, all of a sudden it would start going, like it would just be like fucked up, and it would scare everybody and be like, what the fuck is that? Or it would start going, just making these weird fucking noises. And then the thing that unit, let's call that unit A, that unit was fucked. And you're like, nobody fixes these things. So we're like, oh, that thing must be garbage. What we learned was it just needed to be taken out of the rack and put in like, timeout for like a couple of weeks. So we had a rotating like batch of prime times. And so when one would go on the fritz, we'd put a new one in the rack, and that one would come out and go in the tech room. But the crazy thing was like 6 months later, that one that was making that noise would get put back in the rack because the other one started making noise, and it would work fine for like 3 months. And so anyways, this is actually a really good recreation of it. Will, what are you saying here? Oh, the numbers need to glitch to be a good replication. Oh yeah. Well, that was, the glitchy numbers were also, that was the 949s. Here, I'll show you the glitchy numbers. Check this out. And they actually did the glitchy numbers. Check this out. Look at the glitchy numbers. Yeah. Yeah, these things were great. We had like a lot of the hardware versions of these. Yeah, it was pretty cool. Anyways, back to the reverbs. I really like that, or the delays. The primetime delay is a really great sound. And as you turn, there's one knob on it that that you turn up, and it basically like cuts the sample rate in half. So it just starts getting more lo-fi the more that you like divide the delay time. This plugin, a producer that I work with, a really talented producer writer, his name's Scott Stevens, who I do a lot of work with. He uses this plugin a lot, and there are some really great sounds in this. And I don't think I ever even looked at this plugin until he started sending me stuff that I mixed for him. And he would have like, he's really great with like textures and stuff like that. And he'd have he'd have this on a lot of like vocals and ambient guitars and stuff like that. We call it the soup. And I'm just like, fuck, that's incredible. Like, just the sound of this thing is great. It's really creative. And so I've started using it as well. That's something I got from him when I need like really ambient and long delays that kind of like diffuse, or, you know, this has got a really cool option for character delays, or if you just want to make it really simple. I would almost say if there was a plugin that I had to use, if Echoboy disappeared tomorrow, this might be my kind of catch-all delay. And I know that's crazy because native instruments, typically you're like, yeah, those aren't, it's like synths and Contact and all that shit. Their effects have gotten a lot better, and this has been around for a long time. But this is probably like, next to Echoboy, might be like the most like flexible, do anything you want with delay. So if you have the native instruments bundle, definitely play with that. Here's another quick thing that I like to use. It's not, I mean, I guess it's not necessarily just a delay. Well, it's not really a delay, but anyways, Microshift. This is kind of based off of, I think, like the Dimension D, and or like the whole like Eventide harmonizer Microshift. I can't remember like what they specifically modeled it after, but it does that thing. It kind of gives you like a widener, fake harmonizer, pitch thing, micro pitch, whatever. And this is great. This is just another one of those ones that just works really well. There's probably 10 other things that do this now. This one, I like the sound of it. It's easy to tweak. Good to go. Okay, let's get to the master bus stuff. And I mean, you can use this on whatever you want. You don't have to only use it on master bus, but here's a relatively new plugin. Man, Will, you're getting the blast from the past. We used to have a Sontec 432 at the Chop Shop. And again, going back to like some of my heroes, Randy Staub used to use a Sontec on everything. I think Bob Rock did too. A lot of the mastering guys had these things. And so I have been on the hunt for 20 years to find something that actually kind of gives me the Sontec curves and flavor. And this is really, really good. So I tried the Acoustica version. I tried the IK multimedia version. Plugin Alliance did like kind of like a, it wasn't like a Sontec, like this version of the Sontec, but it was a different Sontec version. They're all okay. This one to me, and I don't care if it's like, I didn't go rent a $50,000 Sontec and like A/B it. I don't care if it's exactly the same, but this one more than all the other software versions of it. Again, when I do something, when I boost, when I cut, when I do moves that I used to do on the Sontec, or when I'm in a studio that has a Sontec, this does what I hear in my head before I do it here. And so that to me is like the mark of a plugin that works with me. So at Will, you just asked, how does it compare to the hardware? I haven't A/B'd it directly, and it's almost, exactly. 1 dB boost at 10K. This is like one of the few plugins that I can actually like I'll get to the end of a mix, of a rock mix, and I'll find myself boosting like 2 dB of like 1200 hertz. Like that's the not grossest frequency, but that's not a nice frequency. And with this plug, like with a Sontec, you're like, holy shit, now my mix sounds aggressive. Doesn't sound nasally. It doesn't sound fucked. It just gives it an eh. And you're like, there are not a lot of other plugins that you can do with that. But yeah, I mean, this plugin, like you do the smiley face. You do like the 1 dB at, well, this one's at 12. It's got the shelf at 10 or 12, and then it's got the 3 bands here. Like for me, like you do a 1 at 8 and a 1 at 50. And like, that's your, like, just put everything through that, at least just to start. And yeah, everything's just better. So anyways, is this authentic to the hardware? I would imagine they probably got it as close as they could, and maybe it's exact. I don't care. All I know is this reacts the way that I expect a Sontec-ish EQ to react, and it sounds great, and I like the interface. They added some extra things here that doesn't exist in the hardware world. Love it. And I think it's relatively new. If it's not new, like new, like it's new to me. Like I found it, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, maybe not even that, maybe it was less than that. But here's another awesome plugin, the Vitalizer. This, again, it's a hardware recreation, but this has a stereo expander, and this is almost like, it's not an Aphex exciter and it's not a BBE, but you can kind of use it for that same kind of thing where you can get the big fake wide thing. You can like give yourself like the big bottom end boost. You can give yourself like the really hyped top end. This you can get carried away with and wreck your shit fast. Be careful. A little goes a long way, but I've done some mixes where if you turned this thing off, you wouldn't pay me $50 to do what you were hearing. And then when you turn that on, you're like, that fucking song sounded great on the radio yesterday. And it was heavy lifting. Not on purpose. Like it just kind of happened. If you mix through that thing and turn it off, you're fucked. So you better leave it on. And you better make sure they update it and stay with the software, or stay with the operating system, or you're never going to be able to recall that mix ever again. And there's nothing that does that all in one thing. Like you'd be building that from 4 different things. I'm not going to talk too much about this. This is Ozone. I've owned every version of Ozone. To me, this is just, I feel like this is almost just like a must-have if you are working, mixing, mastering, even producing to a certain extent, because a lot of like the individual modules, like this has all of the modules in, but I use this a lot. I use this a lot in the individual modules. Like I'll use the imager a lot. So instead of using the full Ozone, I'll just use just like the imager module on its own. I don't know if everybody knows that that is an option. Or I'll use like the dynamic EQ on its own. I used to use the dynamic EQ module before I started using Fabfilter. Now I find Fabfilter a lot easier to work with, so I use that instead. But the individual modules on this for mixing are great. And then obviously as a bus, like a finalizer, or even like as a bus processor is awesome. To me, this is just like, I don't know, if I run across people who don't have this, unless they're doing something very specific, you know, it's kind of like, you should probably just get that thing. It solves so many problems. Okay, we're rounding the corner here, guys. We are 2.5 hours, and you are all awesome troopers. This is great. This is fun. Like I said at the beginning, I've been avoiding gear stuff because it's like there's a bad, weird thing going on right now on YouTube with, you know, pro audio influencers, you know, hawking shit that the only thing that it really produces is income and revenue for them. But this is fun. This is fun, and I hope you guys get something out of this, even though it's just more of a show and tell. But anyways, the Weiss MM1. So when I worked at Sony, way back in the day, they had an in-house mastering guy, Peter Letros, and he had these units, these Weiss digital EQs, dynamics, whatever. And I remember the thing at the time was like, digital was supposed to be bad. Like, digital's bad, digital's bad. And he would do mastering that just sounded so good. And I'd be like, what did you use? And he's like, oh, I just used the Weiss, whatever. And, or, maybe he did a couple things, but he really, like, he used these quite a bit, at least for a shorter period of time when we were kind of geeking out on it a little bit. And it always kind of stuck with me. And I know, and I've paid attention to some other mastering guys that use them. And then when Softube did their version of it, I downloaded the trials, and I just, again, do they sound exactly the same as the units? I don't care. They sound good to me. I like using them. So I use this as my finalizer, just to make everything loud and just kind of lower the dynamic range a little bit and just like pump it up. Sometimes I'll take this off when I print the mix for mastering, and sometimes I'll just turn down the output so it's still doing its thing, and the mastering guy will get it that way, but it leaves him some headroom. I like the way this sounds a lot. I like what it does. Don't know what it's doing. I just like it. Won't talk too much about this next plugin because I think we kind of talked a little bit about it on one of the other live streams. But this is a plugin called AB, or Metric AB, or AB Metric AB. Sorry. This is a really cool plugin. So aside from being able to load a bunch of tracks, existing audio files, existing mixes, and being able to quickly switch between your two, between like your mix and your reference mix, it also volume matches them, because obviously if whatever's louder is always going to sound a little bit better. It lets you solo frequency bands, so you can really compare your mid-range or your bass or your high frequencies. But the other thing that's really cool about this is it's got an awesome spectrum analyzer built in. It's got some great metering built in here as well. So you could use this as your metering solution if you wanted to. And then again, you've got your A-Being. You can match. You can overlay the spectrum analyzer, so you can be looking at a mix that somebody else did that you really like the sound of. And if you're just trying to dial in, be like, what is he doing that? I got this problem area, and you can really dig in on this. Like, again, this is like a no-brainer. Like, everybody should have it. It's so useful for so many different things. Here's an oldie buddy goodie. The Massey L2007. I still use this a lot. If I'm sending out a mix that I just need to gain up and make really loud and exciting just for like client, this is my go-to. It doesn't fuck with the mix. It just makes it loud. And for that purpose, it's the best that I've found. And for that purpose, I'm always looking for new stuff. I'm always looking to see, and be like, is there something that I can give the client when I'm sending out mixes that I can just make it loud and exciting, but then when I take it off to send it to the mastering guy, it's not like, whoa, what happened? The mix fell apart. And this does that better than I think anything else that I've found. So that's a really great one. We are rounding the corner. And here's another utility tool that I love. It's called Decibel, and it's basically a metering plugin. But the cool thing about this is you can build like your own meter. You can use whatever types of meters you want. You can make them as big or as small as you want. You can change all the colors. Like, I've got, actually it's on my old system. I got to import it. But like, how cool is this? This is awesome. I don't know, is it super useful for you? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I love this. So part of my mixing setup, I've got my main screen in front of me, and then I've got my control surface, and I've got two little screens that are kind of like where like the meters of a console would be. And so when I'm mixing, I love having this plug-in on one of my little screens above my my control surface, and just watching meters go, and I don't know, it just makes me feel good. I just love seeing the meters go and the lights flashing, and like, I just like it. And it just makes me feel good. And yeah, you know, you can use it for, utility purposes of, you know, the spectrum analyzer, making sure there's, you know, frequencies that aren't building up, or like the you know, the phase scope or whatever. But I just like looking at it. Makes me have fun. Just gives me a little fun. Couple other quick things. Just because I'm in a mood to share. Oh, I got to reactivate this. I haven't used this plugin since I swapped over my rig. Elastique is my favorite, like, time stretching plugin. I use Melodyne mainly for my vocal editing, but I also still use Auto-Tune for like just running it in auto, or if I want to quickly spot tune, like let's say there's a word that I'm like, I'm not ready to edit vocals yet, but there's a word that I'm like, that's just bugging me. I'll just open up this in Audio Suite and I'll just graph it with Auto-Tune real fast. This is actually the new version that I don't think I've used that one yet either. These are just some utility stuff. Vocaline, again, another awesome like utility plugin. A lot of great uses for that, for editing vocals and also not vocals. You can use it for other reasons. And Izotope RX. I use that a lot for repair stuff. This is kind of like their all-in-one quick one. If you need to dig in, obviously they've got their other modules, but this is kind of like the quick, I just need to declick one spot. This is a really quick and easy way to do it. So, okay. Holy shit, that was a lot of plugins. Okay. We're going to go to Q&A. Is anybody left? Yeah, there's still some people there's still some people that hung with us. All right, what do we got? What do we want to do? Who's got some questions? Let's see, do I have the chat up here? Oh, I do have the chat up here. Dax, this has been great. Let me know my train of thought around plugins is in line with the pros. I fill the gaps in the BAT utility belt. 100%. Again, purpose, right? When you're buying plugins, when you see a Black Friday sale come on and it's like this compressor or whatever, like, do a little mental exercise and be like, what are the three things that I have that get me close to that already? And just be like super objective and honest with yourself as to whether or not that thing's actually doing something that doesn't already do it. And if you convince yourself that you're like, no, I think it might, download the trial. Don't please stop watching YouTube videos of guys who have never made anything that you've ever heard, ever. They might be great, but you don't know if they're great. And the only reason they're telling you something's great is because they're getting paid to do it. Don't buy plugins because of that. Please. We gotta start using our own ears and our own brains and figuring out, like, why are we using this stuff? Is it going to do something for you? And if it's not, don't buy it. Don't get sucked in. Is there an analog piece of gear that you haven't seen in plugin format that you think should have a plugin version, or is it just hasn't been nailed digitally yet? Well, I'm not going to give you all my ideas, man. I got business ventures myself. So funny. That's a funny question, because that was kind of like the way that I sold off a bunch of hardware. My philosophy was I do have a little bit of hardware, and but I used to have a lot more, and my philosophy was, once I can find a plugin that replaces the hardware within a certain margin of error, and again, everything's a trade-off. So when I would do an A/B and be like, does this plugin sound exact in solo on like a really clean whatever? And I'd be like, no. When I scope it, does it look the same on the meter? No. In a mix, is it good? Yes. I don't have to worry about recalls. I don't have to worry about repairs. I don't have to worry about only having one of them. I don't have to worry about power. I don't have to worry about space. That's worth a little bit of a trade-off maybe on the Sonnox for me. and I'll do it. And so I did that, and I started getting rid of hardware. I still do have a few pieces of hardware. And here's the other thing. Talk about like just knowing, like being honest with yourself. I am 100% honest with myself about the fact that I have some pieces of hardware that have a plug-in equivalent that absolutely sounds as good or the same. But I like having the hardware available to either quickly glance at or to put my hand on and to tweak when I can close my eyes. One of those things, like for instance, I've got a Dangerous Audio Bax EQ. They make, I think there's two different plug-in emulations of that, and I've done the AB. They sound awesome. I could interchange them, no problem. You would never know. Why haven't I gotten rid of the Bax yet? And I probably will. But why I haven't gotten rid of it yet is because when I use the Bax on a mix, I get it set to where I think it's going to be. And then what I like to do is at the very end of the mix, I like to close my eyes and I like to put my hand on the high, the high, you have to turn two knobs, the high and the low. And I'll just kind of notch up a couple and down a couple and just find that spot. And to me, that disconnect from the computer is so beneficial. It's not even about the sound, and it's not even about the hardware versus software. Like if I had a control surface on the other side of the room that controlled the software, like that would provide almost the same thing, but it just gives me this little bit of disconnect that gives me this little bit of like context, or just gives me a slight change in perspective. It gets me out of the computer for a second. So again, I know that's why I have that thing. The Overstayer, the plugin versus the hardware, I might start using the plugin more, and I'll get to a point where I'm like, I don't need to use the hardware anymore, and I'll probably get rid of that. I think those are the only like hardware things that I like the plugin equivalents I still have like the hardware ones kicking around. So yeah, there are a few pieces that they haven't nailed it yet. The guitar amp thing is interesting because, and you guys should start blowing up Miko's email, because the guitar amps that I want to still model don't exist in the emulation world, and if they do, they're not good. It's kind of like this. It's kind of like how the VH4 was. So I selfishly want those in the box so they're easy to use. Apparently, the guitar plug-in emulation market has become very saturated, and so it's actually not as profitable for the software companies anymore. But the frustrating thing is it's become saturated with 8 versions of a triple rectifier, and it's like, oh, revision A, revision B, revision C, revision D, this is the dual, this is the triple. And it's like, meanwhile, it's like there are tens of amazing amps that are unique that never get the time of day, because kind of like my VH4, maybe the awareness about it, maybe people don't know what they're buying. And unless you get a marketing campaign, which unfortunately the CB4 didn't get, unless you get a big marketing blitz, people aren't going to buy it. And so then nobody wants to make the only ones people want to make are the ones that people sell, the ones that people buy. And those are like the ones that everybody already knows. So yeah, we don't need another 5150. Same way we don't need another 1176. So, there are still a few things out there that I can't think of any off the top of my head. But there are a few out there that I think somebody should still kind of model, or at least start with and get it further. Yeah. Any hardware sell-off regrets? I'll tell you, the only hardware sell-off regrets I have, it has actually nothing to do with working. It just has value, like money, investments. Like there's stuff I sold like 10 years ago for like $2,000, and then I see them on reverb.com for like $6,000, and I'm like, oh fuck. But I would have had to lug them around for 10 years, and so yeah, it's not a big deal. very rarely is the sell-off regret about like, oh crap, I really want that piece of gear again. It's funny though, that being said, I had a pair of BAE Neve strips that the other day I was doing something that I would have like done a hardware insert through those, and I don't have them anymore, and I sold them, and I was like, fuck. So then I was kind of like going through all the Neve emulations trying to find like the one that kind of, again, it's not that I'm looking for the one that sounds real. I just want the one that I'm like, when I turn that knob to 5, it matches what 5 sounds like in my brain. Or when I turn it to 8K, that sounds like the 8K on a Neve that I'm used to hearing in my head. And some of them do it and some of them don't. So it's finding one that just lines up with what you hear in your head. I feel like so much content now is plugins, music production, mixing things get confusing. So what I took from this is sometimes don't overthink it and just be resourceful. Yeah, you know what? And also don't look for the shortcut. Like, and don't rely on somebody else, especially somebody who doesn't have like a proven track record of doing things that you like. Here's a perfect example. Pick a guitar player who's like a blues guy. Best blues guitar player of all time, who has got the best tone, the best everything, right? I don't know. Everybody, that's going to be something different. Like, let's say, pick a guy like, I don't know, maybe Jeff Beck or something like that, right? Jeff Beck is like easily, arguably one of the best, right? Sounded great, great tone, great everything, right? Well, if you play like gent metal, are you going to take like equipment advice from Jeff Beck? As to like, well, what amp should I get? What guitar should I get? What pickup should I get? You're like, that makes no fucking sense. No. So you got to understand that, like, if you are looking for advice, go to people who are doing the thing that you like, because at least then you know you guys are going to have similar tastes and you're going to be in line with, you know, kind of what you are trying to achieve. But even better yet, yes, when it comes to plugins, you don't have to go to the store and dish out $4,000 to take a piece of hardware home and hope that you can return it. No. You can download a trial and you can use it. So if you're going to spend 20 minutes watching a YouTube video of somebody reviewing a new plugin, don't. Go get the trial and spend 20 minutes doing it yourself. Especially if it's some guy who makes rap music that you've never heard, or death metal that actually doesn't even make records, and well, it's like, or doesn't, like, it doesn't line up with what you want to do, or isn't even that good. Like, just, it doesn't make any sense. So we need to kind of like, if that honestly is probably I know showing you all of my plugins probably doesn't really hammer home that point, but that's kind of what needs to be done. And that's, yes, you don't have to get overcomplicated with stuff. You don't. Find something you like, figure out why you like it, figure out what's important to you, and then just roll with it for a little bit. It's not that big of a deal. So, this is very informative. It's your time. Do you have found a plugin that does with the SSR wow thing? No, actually, that would be actually a cool plugin to do. That being said, there are ways to. Here's the thing. The wow thing does something very specific that gives you a width and a hype, okay? If you want more width and you want more hype, there are ways to get that. It's just not the way the wow thing does it. So I hope when you guys listen to some of the the big Nickelback rock stuff, I hope you're like maybe speculating whether or not the wow thing was used in some of that stuff, because like I do other things to try to achieve what that does. That's just a different tool to do it. But no, I haven't actually found a plugin that does that exactly. So that's actually a good one. What do you think of STL tones or neural DSP? I love the Neural DSP stuff. A lot of their amps I like. Some of them I don't. It's just more of a taste thing. I find their amp models to probably be, as a whole, as a company, if you had to take everything that they do and put it into like one company and like judge the company on everything as opposed to maybe like their top 3 plugins, I'd probably say they're probably the best. And for me, what I mean the best at is, like we've been talking about for the last 3 hours, sound, interface, ease of use, flexibility, price, support. All of this stuff adds up into kind of like whether or not these plugins are good. And I think Neural makes some amazing amp simulator plugins. Obviously, like I was talking about the CB4 from ML. I think that's for being a diesel emulation and for being an amp emulation that's trying to emulate a real amp, and a real amp that I own and that I know intimately. It's like, yeah, like that's as good as it gets. But as a whole, like the Neural stuff's awesome. STL I've played with. I prefer, with the amp simulators, I prefer like the scenario of like, this is recreating the amp and all the knobs and everything. Whereas I feel like a lot of this STL stuff is almost more like a Kemper, where it's like just kind of captured a profile as opposed to like captured like the components and the interaction of all the controls and everything. I could be wrong on that. But I think everybody's making great stuff. Again, this is where it's like, I don't want you to say, oh, well, Chris says Neural's the best, I'm going to go buy all the Neural stuff. No. Download all the trials and figure out what you like the best. You might not like the way the Neural interfaces are, right? You might download the CB4 and say, oh, well, Chris says it's the best diesel. And you might be like, well, you know what? I just don't like the diesel amp. I just don't like it. Or I don't like the way I have to switch to the cabinet page and then not look at, like, maybe you don't like that. Like, and then that's pain in the ass for you. And you're like, I don't care how good it sounds, I'm not going to use it. I don't like that. Or maybe it's a CPU log. I know some of the Neural stuff. I got a call from a friend the other day, and his system was just stalling. And he's like, I'm trying to get this thing set up so I can send you a mix, and it's just stalling like crazy. And I jumped on and had a peek at his session over FaceTime, and it's like he had like 17 amp sims. And I'm like, well, your computer's getting stalled. And that's not a Neural thing. That's just the amp sim thing. But yeah, there's lots of great stuff being made out there. And that's why it's so hard to cut through the bullshit. It's so hard to cut through the bullshit, but don't let a YouTube influencer cut through the bullshit for you, because they're the thickest layer of the bullshit, unfortunately. Okay, next question. Is there an engineer, producer, mixer that you would love to pick their brain like we are able to do through this? Doesn't have to be alive or working, and what would you ask them? Man, fuck, that's a great question. I mean, the guys that I looked up to, or that like I remember like being very into, aware of, and intrigued by the way that albums sounded, like young. Like that's not something I got into when I was 20. Like I have vivid memories of like listening to albums when I was like 8 and like liking sounds. And so being like, oh, I like that. And then being like, well, I like that too. And then realizing like the same guy produced them, or the same guy mixed them, or whatever. That's when you could actually see album credits and know who actually did stuff. And so the guys that made the records that I loved the most, the sound of, the production style, all of that stuff, and ultimately what inspired me to do what I'm doing right now, handful of people. Bob Rock, Bruce Fairburn, Mutt Lang, Randy Staub, Mike Shipley. I mean, you could probably throw in, those are probably like the most impactful for me. You could probably throw in a handful of like the engineers that worked with Mutt like back in the day. I'm just completely spacing. who was the engineer on the AC/DC stuff. Oh, I'm so spacing right now. I'm so sorry, guys. I feel terrible. But anyways, I mean, I've been really, really, really fortunate to have, like, I've hired Randy Staub to do some mixing for projects I've worked on. And I mean, I haven't really like fanboyed with him. I would love to. But like, you know, we were working together. And just being able to sit and watch him work and ask him some questions and just kind of like see some stuff. But, I would love to sit down with Randy and be like, hey, can I geek out with you? Because I haven't really done that, although like I've spent a little bit of time with them. Same thing as like I've met Bob Rock a couple times, but never really geeked out. So obviously Bruce Fairburn and Mike Shipley are no longer with us. The fact that that will never happen kind of makes me want to put those two guys into that like fantasy dream scenario of picking their brains. And then, I mean, Mutt is the GOAT. So Mutt's the GOAT. I told Chad from Nickelback, I said, if you guys tour Europe and you're over in Switzerland, I said, I don't ask anybody for favors. And I said, I will ask you to set up a dinner with Mutt and I will fly over. And I was like 4% joking and 96% serious. So that still might happen. If that happens like that, that might be like next level. So great question. You got my gear spinning. Now I'm like, what would I ask them? I mean, here's the thing. Here's what I would ask them. Like I probably would ask them less about what gear they used and what settings were on what. I mean, I would ask a few of those things, but I would probably ask a lot of just kind of like how certain productions evolved, or like where did you get the inspiration to make a snare drum sound like, I mean, snare drums in active rock don't sound like snare drums. My snare drums don't sound like snare drums, but like that started somewhere. Or like what was the inspiration, or like what challenges did you run into, like when Bob was doing Dr. Feelgood and like Tommy wanted this massive drum room sound, but it also still had to sound big and tight and impactful and punchy. Like I know what it ended up being, and that's cool. What were the 40 things that you guys did that didn't work? Like, and what led you guys to there? That to me is interesting. You know, so I think a lot of like the evolution and the philosophy and the vision and the strategy, or sometimes there is no strategy. Like I think there's a misconception in what we do that everything is like master planned. And so like when somebody's like, oh dude, that guitar tone, how'd you get that guitar tone? And you're like, I don't know. We just plugged into the amp at the studio, and that's kind of what the guy who was recording the night before left his shit set at, and it worked. They're like, what? You mean you didn't spend 4 days doing that and trying out every mic and tweaking the EQ and doing all that shit? And you're like, no, like we just fucking plugged in. And, you know, here's actually, here's a perfect example talking about the Nickelback stuff and Mutt. This is a story from Chad. I might get this wrong, but I think it was the very beginning of Burn It to the Ground. The and then the drum kicks in, but it's just one guitar. That I think was Chad's like demo riff. And he was just coming up with the riff, and he like plugged into kind of like whatever. That tone, I've had people be like, I want my guitars to sound like the first 8 bars of Burn It to the Ground. That's the rhythm sound I want. And they think that was like some master planned thing. And ultimately it was like the demo, like kind of like I just plugged into whatever to get my idea down. And then I think the story goes when they went to do the actual album, they couldn't actually like beat that tone for that part. So they stuck like the demo version in it. I could have been butchering that, but I think it was something along those lines. So might not even been that song, but maybe I made that up. Maybe I dreamt it. Who knows? But it's a good story. So yeah, it's you know, sometimes just like hearing how somebody got to something, or, you know, like I know the thing that I have heard Bob Rock talk about a lot with like the Black album is, you know, that was a scenario of it took them a long time to get the rhythm guitar sound. Like they really had to like play with stuff and really figure it out. And it took some time and effort. And I mean, I would love to be like, yeah, like where did that start? And what was the evolution to get to where you guys ended up? And what consisted of the decision to be like, yeah, we got it. We can stop searching. We're good. That's interesting to me. Don't care that there was a 421 on the cabinet. I kind of don't care that it was a vintage 30 from 1984. I mean, I care a little bit that it was like, you know, an EMG 81 and a Gibson Explorer. Like I do. Or that it was a Mark II C+, you know, slaved into a, I don't know, can't remember what that chain was, but whatever. It matters a little bit, and I do care a little bit, but it's all the other stuff I really care about. So, great question. That was an awesome question. Thank you. That's why I appreciate doing that. Respect the work you've done. Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I really do appreciate that. Schmerler, Fraser. Oh, yeah. Mike Fraser, Mike Plotnikoff. Like, those are the guys who, you know, kept making those guys were making records with Bruce Fairbairn when, you know, Bob obviously took off and became kind of his own thing. So yeah, those guys are right up there as well. Man, this is fun. This is fun. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, Hammer, you say like it's a small group of us that nerds love. It's interesting that like what I've come to realize, and doing these videos, or these live streams and beginning kind of convincing myself to, I love this. What we're doing right now, I might have sounded like a broken record because I think I've said this before. The only thing that can be better than what's happening right now is if like the people who are watching this right now, if we were in a restaurant together and we had a bunch of bottles of red wine and steaks and we were having this conversation, like that's the only thing that is better than, like, I love this. But what I'm finding out is like, it's actually not that small of a group who wants to know this stuff. And it's an even bigger group who doesn't quite realize that they want to know this stuff. And I mean, I'm definitely, you know, I'm not the best conduit for this. I know, like, you know, there's no production value here. These things, there's me rambling for 3 hours. You know, I get that, like, from a YouTube format, this isn't like necessarily like the most entertaining thing. But what I have realized is 90% of what's out there and is packaged really nicely for everybody is not what's important for the guys that I mentioned, the Bob Rocks, that like those guys made records without YouTube influencers. Those guys made records without 55 plugins, those, you know, of the same compressor. Those guys made the records that will stand the test of time. Those guys made the records that I literally would not have stepped foot in a recording studio if Bob Rock and Randy Staub hadn't have made Dr. Feelgood and the Black Album. I would either be flying fighter jets or being like a Dexter, like, undercover Secret Life vigilante. That was my ulterior option or alternative options of going into the studio business. I'm half joking, but like the stuff that's important to them is the stuff that should be important to everybody else, and there's just not enough of that out there. And so, not that, you know, I'm shouldering all of that, but I love having these conversations, and I'm finding, and I, for a long time, thought that people didn't want to have these conversations. I thought everybody just wanted what's your 3 secret tricks to making a kick drum sound good? And it's like, it kind of doesn't matter. Now, and I'm realizing, and it warms my heart, and it encourages me more to do these types of videos and to have these kind of more big picture conversations when I know that people actually do want to know this type of stuff. So yeah, I don't know what I was trying to say with all that, but anyways, there's my ramble. Like I said, ramble for 3 hours. Holy shit, we are at 3 hours. Okay, I'm gonna take a couple more questions and I got to go to bed. Off topic, do you think rock will come back? Well, I don't think rock's ever really left. It's not like people, I mean, I've been paying my bills and feeding my family for more than 20 years. I've never done a rap record. I've never done a dance record. I've never done an R&B record. I do rock. And yeah, I've done some pop. The country stuff that I've done is more rock than some of the rock was like 40 years ago. So it's just, it's cyclical. And I think ultimately, like, the rock world became a little too homogenous. And so I think it's going to take something to kind of break the cycle of the thing that gets popular is the thing that sounds like that. So we're going to make more of that. And then everything sounds like that. Nobody wants to veer from that because that's all that's getting played. And that's all that people seem to like. And, but at some point here, I mean, Aerosmith, I think, is done after this tour. Motley's got to be close to being done. Like even Metallica, they're still like selling out stadiums. At some point, people are going to have to start like getting invested in other newer bands if they want to keep the ball rolling. Because at some point, these guys can't, like, they're not going to be able to tour anymore. They're not going to be able to make records anymore. And unfortunately, the rock that's still the biggest is the stuff that was made 20, 30 years ago. So I hope it's not sound-alike stuff. And I mean, as awesome as Greta Van Fleet is, and it's cool to have something that sounds like Led Zeppelin, it's like, it's too on the nose for me. I'd rather just listen to Led Zeppelin. So I hope people kind of don't just do the same old thing. And I think that's probably been one of the reasons why rock has kind of been a little bit stagnant is I think a lot of people are either chasing what's popular or the thing that's familiar or the thing that's classic. And there's not a lot of innovation. Like when you think of, I mean, even when you think of like Creed and like early Nickelback stuff, like that was fresh at the time. And then it got played out. And then it's like everybody started sounding like that. So then it got old. Right. And that's just the cycle that happens, that we need to break out of that. And the new fresh thing needs to come in. So all the Vancouver legends, proud to be Canadian, working in the music business, grew up on these records. Yeah, it was funny. On the last live stream, Paul DeCarly chimed in and he's like, why are all the best producers and engineers Canadian? And it's weird. So how many guys did I name? I think I named 5 guys. 3 of them are Canadian. Bruce Fairburn, Bob Rock, Randy Staub. Mutt's obviously not. Mike Shipley's not. Mike Fraser, Mike Plotnikoff. Yeah, a lot of Canadians. Because the weather's so shitty up here in Vancouver. You have absolutely zero motivation to actually leave the studio. I can vouch for that. I love hearing about the secret sauce production ideas, like adding a shaker during a chorus to get movement. Seems obvious when you think about it, but if you've never heard it, it's obviously not. Yeah, man. And that's the thing. It's like it's kind of a weird dichotomy, a little bit of like, I sit here and preach that like all that kind of shit doesn't matter. Obviously it does, but it's like it's more about like the purpose and the intent and the philosophy of like, okay, well, what I don't put a shaker in the chorus because, you know, like Mutt Lang told me to put a shaker in the chorus. And I don't put a shaker in the chorus if it doesn't need a shaker in the chorus. Why is there a shaker in the chorus? That's the conversation we need to have. Or this is a conversation that comes up a lot when I'm producing. The verse sounds, tempo is perfect. The chorus tempo is perfect. The pre-chorus sounds slow. Why is that? If the tempo is the same. And you know what the answer is? Everybody's like, oh, well, we got to bump up. This is what the band will say. Oh, why can't we just bump up the BPM in the pre-chorus? And we're like, well, we can, but then that's going to cause a problem when the tempo drops back down in the chorus. What if we do something to provide a little bit of movement and forward momentum? And sometimes a 16th note shaker can make something feel faster than it actually is. Vice versa, an 8th note shaker can almost slow down a track. So it's like, why are we doing this? We're not just doing it because it's like we're checking a box on a spreadsheet. We're doing it because there's a reason. That's the conversation. That's the decision-making hierarchy that I'm trying to preach and tell everybody about. And yes, so it's like secret sauce. Yes, don't put it, but it's not. It's only relevant if it's relevant. Don't put a shaker in the chorus if it doesn't need a shaker in the chorus. And you might actually be hurting yourself if you put a shaker in the chorus and make a chorus that you don't want to sound like upbeat and skippy. And all of a sudden now your chorus sounds like, you've got this chorus that's like, maybe it's got like big, long, drawn out vocals and this heavy theme, and the tone of the song is somber. And you've put the shaker in the chorus and you're like, why is this song feeling almost kind of happy? This is a sad song. You're like, could you just put this like going through the chorus? It's like, nope. So again, why are we doing it? Why? But yes, 100%. There's all those little tricks that we've learned, that you guys hear about, that you read about, that you watch on YouTube, that you whatever. I love all the tricks. Nobody talks about why it worked or why they did it. Let's have that conversation more. Okay, a couple more questions, then I really got to go. This is awesome. These kinds of chats videos are so much more valuable than talking technique. Oh, thank you. I mean, you just said it when I should have looked at the comment before I started going off. Yeah, the theory and the mindset is valuable and interesting. And I think ultimately that other question about like talking with, Mutt or Bob Rock or Randy or whatever, just knowing what I'm passionate about and what fulfills me and what really matters to me. I might use drum setup as an icebreaker, but I think if me and Randy went out for dinner and had this conversation, what it looked like an hour in and 3 hours in would be very different than I think what it would look like 5 minutes in. I think it would quickly veer away from like, what was your favorite compressor? Or what did you use on like James Hetfield's voice for that one part of that one song? It's like that wouldn't last for very long. That's not a 3-hour conversation that I care to have. So yeah. Rock World's got generic, needs to get some rawness, realness. Yep. Polished production is great, but it's taken away from what made Metallica, Soundgarden, or finding who's great. Well, here's what it is. I don't want to just say it's good production, partly because I like good production and I don't know how to make shitty sounding records. And when I say that, I'm not saying that all my records sound great, but I've been hired by bands that are like, yeah, I don't want it to sound polished. I don't want it to sound too big. I want it to sound raw. And I'm like, I just don't know how to make those records because I don't know how to decipher the difference between like cool and hip and shitty. Because for me, it's a fine line and I don't know how to straddle that line. What I will say is the polished production, that's not the problem. We can have something new with polished production. The problem is what we have now associated polished production with is everybody using the same like 4 samples or the same presets or the same guitar tones because it's so easy. And it's like, I mean, this 3-hour video of me showing you, if this would have been hardware in these plugins, first of all, there wouldn't be one studio in the world that had all of this right out of the gate. Wouldn't have existed. The best studio in the world would not have had all of what I just showed you in one Pro Tools session of plugins. So we all have the same tools. Unfortunately, we're all being exposed to the same influence of how to do things, the same quick and easy, dirty way of doing things. And unfortunately, what I have realized, and I've tried not to fall into the trap, is when you used to be able to make a living making a record taking 4 months, and budget shrinks so much that now you have to make that same record in a month, let's say. Well, you need to figure out shortcuts. Like, there's no question about it. Like, it's reality. So instead of saying, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to spend 2 days trying out 20 different guitar amps. And we're going to spend a day playing with different snare drums. And we're going to, you know what? Let's go to the pawn shops and see if we can go pick up some old guitars and some old funky shit that like have pickups, like old junky shit that nobody's ever heard before. And all of a sudden you've blown a week and you haven't recorded a single note. You can't make records like that anymore. A few people can, most people can't. So what ends up happening is you're like, and like even like Will knows this. We were at the chop shop. Like we had a drum kit that stayed mic'd up. We had amps and cabinets that were always mic'd up. Mics didn't move, settings didn't change, and bands would come in and you plug in, and within 10 minutes, we've got you a really good sound. Is it your sound? No, it's the chop shop sound. And the drummer would go in and he'd sit on the kit, and we're like, we know that kit sounds good. We've mic'd it up. And that's what you have to do. So then what ends up happening is, and I'm using the chop shop as an example. I mean, pick any production team that has been knocking out albums in active rock for the last 20 years. It's the same thing. I know very few who are like, every album gets a new drum kit. Every album we go to a different studio. Every album we ditch the amps that we had before and we use new ones. It's like, no. We got a month to make this fucking thing. We don't have time to fuck around. Plug into the diesel, turn on channel 3, give them the Les Paul with the P94s, and let's go. And you're like, yeah, but that's the sound on the last 8 albums that we produced for 8 other bands. And we were doing like, mid-tempo 4-chord things. And you're like, then you wonder why everything sounds the same. It sounds really good because it's produced and it's polished and it's good, right? That's not the problem. We can make polished, good produced albums that sound different. We just need people to, number one, get the resources to do it. And unfortunately, I think that needs to come from guys at home making their first album, because it's already a little bit of a side gig for them until they get signed or until it blows up. The guys, unfortunately, like me, who it's like, this is my gig. Like, this is how I feed my family. This is how I support my family. I love making great sounding records, and I love experimenting and making things sound unique and making things sound good. And I purposely don't have templates with the same chains, so that way I don't get put into that trap. But, when you get offered a job, an album project that you really want to do, and the budget's small, and it's either you do it or you don't. You do it, you got to figure out a way to make it work. And sometimes that's just being like, okay, we can't go make our own samples. We got to use the samples we used on the last one. So anyways, long-winded answer. Sorry. Yeah, they're good skiers. Maybe that's what it is. Will, you got to come up here and come skiing before I move back to California. This is going to be my last winter in BC. So you got to come up here. Let's go to Whistler. Trick or trade, and knowing when to use the tricks. Yeah, that's exactly it. Knowing when to use the tricks. That's really good. I love that. Yeah, Will, you're right. The drum samples are way too loud. Guilty as charged. But you're right. You're right. It's so it's so kick, snare, and everything else is buried. At least I try to make guitars loud too. It's amazing how many times I'll send out first draft of a mix and everybody's like, yeah, it sounds really great. Just turn the guitars down. And I'm like, isn't that what rock and roll is? But anyways. Oh no, Gino, I don't, or is it Gene? Geneo? I didn't take that out of context at all. Like, it's all good. It's all good stuff. I know what you're talking about. I just wanted to clarify. Dax, thank you, buddy. Okay. Love this. More cowbell. No cowbell. Why do we need cowbells? Because I want the cows to come home. That's funny. All right. Any more questions? If there are no more questions, I'm going to wrap this up. This has been really fun. Like I said, this conversation kind of went the way that most of my conversations go. We spent 2 hours talking gear, and like the last 30 minutes is like, I feel like the shit that really matters when it has nothing to do with gear. And maybe that's the point of the first 2.5 hours of me showing you plugins that you probably could have just gone and looked at online on your own anyways. So whatever. Miss you too, Will. It's been too long. Like I said, you should come up here. See if you can make a trip up. Wait till it starts snowing, and we'll get up to Whistler for a couple days. Keith, thank you, buddy. Rock Beats West, thank you, guys. This is great. If I can ask a favor of everybody, if some people tuned on later than earlier, I'm trying not to be obnoxious with like social media ads, and I'm trying not to be like super obnoxious with this, but I do want to grow the channel. I do want this to turn into a community. I have plans for, this is like the beginning of something that I think could be really important and really impactful for people like yourselves. And so I want to grow the channel. I want to grow what we're doing here and a lot of this. So subscribe, like, share on social media, like anything that you guys feel compelled to do to kind of keep this going. Love that. And if you don't, that's cool too. No hard feelings. Yeah, this has been awesome. Thank you, guys. We will see you. I'm going to try to get on next week. I'm going to try to start doing these every week. So I hope to see you guys all next week. Oh, the other thing. If you guys have questions, sorry, one more piece of housekeeping. If you guys have questions, a lot of people have been DMing me. Find somewhere in social media to ask the question in the comments. And that way other people, when I answer it, other people can see the answer as well. And that way it's more, I'm answering that question for everybody as opposed to just that one thing. That being said, definitely, I would love your guys' input on like, what's the best day and time to be doing this? I know I'm on the West Coast, so it's like, I'm doing it when it's good for me. And obviously I got to work around my work schedule and all that stuff. But if you guys have input on that you can shoot me DMs for. All right, guys. Be safe, be healthy, have fun, and we'll see you on the next one.